He also received the American Jurisprudence Award in police misconduct in civil rights cases, and tied for the American Jurisprudence Award in contract law. Upon graduating from law school, Judge Perks began his legal career by working as a briefing attorney for Senior Associate Justice Norman Utter, who was a longtime serving judge at the 13th Court of Appeals. 22 years later, Judge Perks ran and was elected to the 13th Court of Appeals and served as justice from 2011 to 2016. He served a 6-year term, and quite frankly, in 2010, when he got elected, down from Corpus Christi, I think he was one of the first Republicans to get elected. It was during the Tea Party wave, and that's important. I'll explain in a minute, because when he ran for re-election, he lost. And he lost because he ran during a presidential year. It's one of the challenges that we face and judges face across the state, and that we have, like this last election. Governor's elections are a little bit different than presidential elections in terms of the voter turnout, and sometimes we lose qualified judges. As this time around, I think we have 28 new appellate court judges throughout the state. In addition to judicial experience, Judge Perks has decades of legal experience, including naming his own legal practice focus in appellate law. He's board certified in appellate law practice. Also does work in practice in business law and mediation specializations in 1965. He has a long list of accomplishments and qualifications. He's also licensed to practice in the state of Texas before the United States District Court for the Southern District, the Fifth Circuit out of New Orleans, and the Supreme Court of the United States of America. And with that, members, I'll let you ask me any questions you like. I think Mr. Perks, Judge Perks, is qualified, and we need some balance in the 13th Court of Appeals, where 5 of the present justices serving are from the Rio Grande Valley, and Judge Perkins is from Corpus Christi. The northern part of the 13th Court of Appeals needs some representation to have a balance. And with that, I think, quite frankly, Judge Perks' qualifications, education, preparation, and experience to serve as justice of the 13th Court of Appeals are well-founded, well-grounded, and I recommend this committee to approve his nomination to the 13th Court of Appeals.
Thank you, Senator Hinojosa. And just to be clear, we'll let everyone introduce their constituents, and then y'all can go, and then we'll bring them back one at a time for their opening statements and questions, and followed by public testimony. Senator Seliger, would you like to introduce Justice Keith Stretcher?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do. Since being admitted to the bar in 1981, Keith Stretcher has spent a long career practicing law as an assistant city manager, as an assistant city attorney, and a city attorney in the city of Midland. I think there's probably no city attorney in the state of Texas who has more experience. And it can be a fairly complex job. This court sits in Eastland with justices from all over that area of West Texas. And Justice Stretcher has served in that court since his appointment for the last several months, and has been particularly industrious and productive, and will continue the tradition of that court of simply doing a good and efficient job as a court of appeals. And I urge the committee's rapid approval of this so he can go back to Eastland and go back to work. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Seliger. And Senator Birdwell, you have 2 constituents, Justice John Neal and Mr. William Dixon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's good to see you wielding the gavel of this committee. Members, let me first introduce Mr. William Dixon. He is the nominee to perform the duties of the Navarro County Criminal District Attorney's Office. Originally from Las Vegas, Mr. Dixon graduated from Baylor Law School in 2005. He's licensed in 3 states and has been attorney for a little over 14 years now. 8 years ago, he had been practicing civil law, but 8 years ago he decided to leave the civil law arena, move back to Texas, and begin serving as a prosecutor in South Texas. About 5 years ago, his college sweetheart and he found the perfect place to raise their 4 children in Corsicana, Texas, moved to Navarro County, and while serving at the Navarro County Criminal District Attorney's Office, he has served as a felony prosecutor and the misdemeanor chief, supervising the misdemeanor prosecutions in the office. He's tried approximately 50 cases since coming to Navarro County. Members, Mr. Dixon came to this nomination by the untimely and unexpected passing of our previous district attorney, Lowell Thompson, who died while in office just a day or two before Election Day back in November. Mr. Dixon has humbly sought this office, regretfully because of the manner in which it was being vacated. But the governor's made an exceptional choice, and he has my full support, and I would like to ask your full support for Will or Mr. Dixon to be confirmed to be the nominee or to perform the duties of the Navarro County Criminal District Attorney. My second nominee to appear before us today is the Honorable John Neal. Judge Neal is the nominee to perform the duties of Justice of the 10th Court of Appeals, headquartered in Waco. The 10th Court of Appeals primarily covers Senator Schwertner and my district, though it does have Coryell County, my former county, but one of your counties, Madam Chair. The bulk of the counties are in Senator Schwertner's district. The bulk of the population is in Senate District 22. There are a number of highly qualified candidates, and I would say 3 of those highly qualified candidates came out of Senate District 22. Judge Neal stood head and shoulders of those 3 candidates, which speaks highly to his qualifications. Judge Neal received his bachelor's degree from Baylor University in 1982, his Juris Doctor from St. Mary's University School of Law in 86. He was appointed to the bench of the 18th District Court, General Jurisdiction Court, headquartered in Johnson County in 1998 by then Governor George W. Bush. He was elected to that position again subsequently 5 times, 2000, 2004, 2008, 2012, 2016. The 18th District Court, with authority in Johnson and Somerville counties, is a general jurisdiction court which hears felonies, criminal, family, and civil cases. He has been board certified by the Texas Board of Legal Specialization in Family Law since 1994. Judge Neal is a life member of the Texas Bar Foundation, an honor bestowed on less than 2% of the attorneys in Texas. In addition to his license in Texas, Judge Neal is admitted to practice law before the Supreme Court of the United States. In 2002, Judge Neal brought court-appointed special advocates to Johnson County, and in his 20 years on the bench, he's been known as a firm but fair judge who actively manages his docket and disposes of cases through the various means of agreement, trial, pretrial motions, and other methods in a timely and an efficient manner. Judge Neal's been married to Kathy for 34 years, is extremely proud of his 3 sons, and again, the governor's made an exceptional nomination. It's a privilege to introduce him to the members of this nominating committee and also request your sound advice and consent and confirm Judge Neal to the 10th Court of Appeals. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Birdwell. Gentlemen, for now, I'll let you sit back in the seats, and we'll have you return one by one. I'd like to call the Secretary of State, David Whitley, up to the witness table and recognize Senator Campbell to introduce her constituent.
Good morning, Madam Chair and committee members. It's with great pleasure that I come before you to introduce one of my distinguished constituents, David Whitley. You know, only 2 months ago, David Whitley was appointed and sworn in as Texas's 112th Secretary of State by our Governor, Greg Abbott, and that was on December 17th. Secretary Whitley has led a distinguished career in public service, including tenures at the Office of the Attorney General as well as the Governor's Office. I know him best, as many of you do, from his time serving in the Governor's Appointments Office. You know, he's warm, he's knowledgeable, and diligent. He's always been easily accessible to discuss the Governor's nominees and help set up meetings for us where we could ask questions and get better acquainted with the nominees that the Governor puts out there. When I think of Secretary Whitley's strengths, several words come to mind. Collaborative. He seeks input to improve processes and procedures for the betterment of Texans. One of his first acts as Secretary of State was to bring the state chairs of both major political parties at the same table to discuss ways to improve election administration in Texas. Compassionate. His office recently announced an initiative to encourage Texas businesses to take steps to combat human trafficking and pool resources to help eliminate human trafficking in Texas. Diligent. He's a hard worker who brings out the best in his staff and peers. Accountable. Well, now while no one likes public scrutiny, everyone must follow the law. Secretary Whitley upholds and welcomes the benefits that transparency brings to the democratic process. He's a true Texan. He's a native of Alice, Texas. He received his finance and law degrees from the University of Texas at Austin. He's a member of the State Bar of Texas and volunteers at the University of Texas Law Mentorship Program. He's a great family man, married to his wonderful wife, Megan, who's here with us today, and they have 2 children, a 5-year-old daughter, Louise, and 3-year-old son, William. Madam Chair, I thank you for allowing me the opportunity to introduce Secretary of State David Whitley to you. I know he's eager to answer questions today, and I can attest to his integrity, which I believe will stand out in his duties and obligations to the state in front of us today. I wholeheartedly endorse him as our 112th Secretary of State, and I believe he will be a great face to represent Texas as a liaison both for the state and in international matters. Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome, Secretary.
Thank you, Senator Campbell. Secretary Whitley, you may have a seat back in the chairs, and at this time I'd like to call forward Justice Neal to have a seat at the witness table and begin your opening comments, please. I'll remind you that you'll be limited to 5 minutes. At that time, we'll take questions from all of the committee members. After the
Hi everyone, this is Bobby Blanchard. I am the Texas Tribune social media editor, and I'm coming to you live out of our newsroom right now. We are streaming let me adjust this camera a little bit. We are streaming the confirmation hearings for Secretary of State David Whitley. Right now, they're doing some judges, and I'm going to take a moment to talk to you while they do that, because I know you're here to watch the Secretary of State confirmation hearing. I expect that they will be getting to David Whitley in sometime in the next hour, quite frankly. I don't think they're going to spend a lot of time talking to the judges that have nominated. I could be wrong. I'm wrong a lot. Could be wrong, but I expect they will be on David Whitley soon. We started a little bit early because I wanted y'all to see Senator Campbell's opening remarks for David Whitley, Secretary Whitley. If you have questions, please let me know. I'm already seeing some questions in the comments. One from Angela. Angela, you want to know, I just found out that my name is on the list. I became a U.S. citizen 1 year ago. Was my vote on the 2018 election counted? And what do I have to do now? So yes, A, it was counted. B, depending on what county you live in, you might be getting a letter in the mail asking you to prove your citizenship. I believe at that point you will have 30 days to provide proof of that. And then once you provide proof of that, you will remain on the rolls. You could be removed from the rolls if you do not provide proof of that. If I were you, I would probably contact your local county officials and ask them what steps to take. The complicated thing, Angela, is different counties are handling this in different ways. Some counties are not sending out any notices right now. Others are. Counties are not required to send out notices. It's up to them individually. So it depends on what county you live in, Angela. I'm watching for questions on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter right now. We are streaming to all three. Hi, Carrie. Thank you for watching.
Background as an attorney for the Second Court of Appeals, my experience in private practice, and my 20 years as judge on the 18th District Court qualifies me for this position. I thank you again for the opportunity to appear, and I'll be happy to answer any of your questions.
Thank you, Judge. Welcome. I just wanted to kind of start out, did you want to comment on what you think the proper role of the judicial branch is within Texas system of government?
To be as succinct as possible, my opinion is that we are there to follow the law. The law is created by the legislative branch. Lawmakers have blessed us with the opportunity to have 2 full-time staff attorneys for each justice. I have 2 wonderful staff attorneys. When Justice Coggins left the bench, on his way back to home on the 7th, the day I was appointed, he came by basically to sell me on his 2 attorneys that he had hired. And he brought me the statistics from his chamber. He brought me the statistics from the 10th Court of Appeals. The 10th Court of Appeals is in wonderful condition as far as timeliness in getting those opinions out. One of the other justices just earlier commented that y'all have helped us out. So I know there's a redistribution sometimes of court cases, and I think that's a mandatory situation where cases have to be taken from one court, given to another court in a time so that justice can be handed down in a timely manner, and I think that's crucial.
Thank you. And members, any questions? Quiet crowd. Do we have any public testimony signed up? Okay, so no public testimony. That's as mean as we can.
So sort of like I thought, they are going rather quickly through this. Judge, only the chair had questions. Nobody else had questions. There was no public testimony. I expect that will be the case for the next few judges. Well, I could be wrong. And then we'll get to the Secretary of State, which I expect will take them a bit longer.
Thanks, Madam Chair. My name is Keith Stretcher. I'm currently a justice on the 11th Court of Appeals in Eastland. The Eastland Court of Appeals goes from the New Mexico border to Mineral Wells, then we go south and we pick up Brownwood and we get Stephenville. If you go down Highway 180 from Seminole to Mineral Wells, we get every county. We have 28. Our main cities, our bigger cities, are Midland, Odessa, Abilene, Brownwood. Let me just tell you a little bit about myself. I went to East Texas State University, graduated, then went to Texas Tech University School of Law. I met my wife at East Texas State University. She graduated from Texas Tech in 1980. We have a long history with Texas Tech. She was the first student to graduate from Texas Tech with a master's that allowed her to teach blind children in Texas. So she taught children from Talingua to Pecos, over to Abilene. Our daughter went to Texas A&M. Things happen, and but then she went to Texas Tech Pharmacy School. She married a young man who went to Texas Tech University Medical School. They are now in Kansas City. He's finishing up his residency. They'll be back in Midland in a year or a year and a half. I have 2 granddaughters, Betsy and Lacey. I'm currently on the court. I know the chair asked about our workload. It's busy. The Eastland Court of Appeals is known as the go-to court for oil and gas litigation. Oil and gas litigation is very time-consuming. It's very complicated.
I see a question. How much money has been spent on this effort so far? I do not know the answer to that question. That is a good question. I know that we have filed a number of open records requests to get more details on this effort and the timing and staffing and everything that went into it. But I don't know off the top of my head I don't think we don't know yet how much money, if any, has been spent on this. It's entirely possible that it was just part of the office's ongoing duties. Well, no, I'll let you know when we know more. You'll know more, basically.
Like I said, I'm currently on the court. We're working hard. We're going to move the docket, and looking forward to it. Thanks, Madam Chair. Be glad to answer any questions.
Yes, sir, and thank you so much for all that you do for our state. You know, a lot of people don't really understand the roles of the different courts within our judiciary and how they relate to other courts. Did you want to elaborate on that with regard to your court?
I think that's a good question. We're an intermediate court, so we're bound by the decisions of the Texas Supreme Court, and we're bound by the decisions of the Court of Criminal Appeals. But about 98% or more of the cases filed in Eastland, they stay in Eastland. We are the court of last resort, the Texas Supreme Court and Court of Criminal Appeals, accept very few of our cases. And so we're it. And so we try to be very careful. We try to review. We try to get a timely decision, and we want to make sure that the people understand that we have read their briefs, that we have taken the time and effort to reach that decision. Because the people in Texas deserve to know what the law is, and they deserve to know that it doesn't matter who's representing them or whatever. They're going to get the same benefit that everybody else gets. And, you know, it's just confidence in the court system, and we're going to make sure that happens.
Thank you. Members, any questions? All right. Do we have any public testimony? No? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I know our room's getting full. We do have an overflow room, E1.012. There is TV access if any of y'all that are standing in the back would like to have a seat. Thank you, Judge.
Thank you.
All right. Judge Perkis, would you like to come? And whenever you're ready.
Good morning, Madam Chair Buckingham and the members of the Senate Committee. Thank you for the opportunity allowing me to appear here today. It is my privilege to have been nominated by Governor Abbott and have the support of Juan Chuy Hinojosa for my nomination to the 13th Court of Appeals. My guiding principle is to be a judge who leads with honor. I apply my principle of leadership to the state, my profession, my community, and my family. Appellate law is my specialty, but the judiciary is my passion. As you saw in my written statement, my appellate law background is distinguished, and my judicial service outside the courthouse for the state of Texas is quite extensive. My call to public service started very young. Events in my early years that shaped who I am include working as a newspaper boy for the Macula Monitor, earning an Eagle Scout Award at the age of 14, and growing up in my family's pharmacy business. My father and mother instilled in me values of hard work and civic involvement that I carry forward to this day. I am humbled to have come this far. From a newspaper boy delivering 80 customers in the Rio Grande Valley to a state court judge who served more than 2 million people across the state of Texas. In all, I hope the public service will be characterized as a judicial leader who believes in equal justice and gives back to his community. I am proud of my record as a former justice on the 13th Court of Appeals. I worked hard to apply my appellate credentials and experience and to make ethical
Gabby,
decisions
I see a question.
for the citizens
Why
of
don't
my
they
20
hire
county
more judges
district
to get
and
backlog
earn
out of our
the
immigration
respect of my
court?
peers across the state?
I'm sorry, I'm going to repeat that question. Gabby, you ask, why don't they hire more judges to get backlog out of immigration court? This is a state, this is a state panel. That's more of a federal issue, and I don't think this panel has really jurisdiction over that issue.
13th Court of Appeals. I'm a team player, ready to get the job done and hit the ground running. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and I'm open for questions.
Thank you so much for coming today. Do you see any changes in the appellate court system that you think need to be pursued or implemented in your experience?
Well, as a judge, we're not obviously allowed to promote any legislation, so obviously I need to stay a little bit away from that particular discussion. Missouri plan is one that's being promoted, I believe, in the state. It's based on merit versus election subsequently to retain your position. I can't take a position one way or the other.
All right, members, any questions? Senator Watson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Judge, I want to ask a couple questions related to information that our office has received and you're probably aware of, but as part of a confirmation hearing, I think it's important for you to have an opportunity to comment on some things. First of all, describe how you have, in the past, when you were on the court, how you worked with other members of the court and what you think is the role of the way the appellate courts ought to work, the judges ought to work with each other on an appellate court.
Basically, let me kind of digress to a moment to how the opinion is made or written in the Court of Appeals. The first thing that happens is the cases are assigned. And in my chambers, we basically discussed each of those cases within the chamber. So at least 2 of the staff attorneys and my administrator were involved in every decision. From there, the case is assigned to a staff attorney. The staff attorneys talk to each other within the chamber to make sure that we are following.
Hey Patricia, I see you have a question. What is the topic being discussed? We expect Secretary of State David Whitley to be up for his confirmation hearing in a few moments. He is a little bit under fire right now because of how his office has handled an effort to verify registered voters as citizens. Our reporter Alexa Uda has covered it extensively. She's live tweeting this hearing. David Whitley is not up right now, but he will be up soon.
I feel like you have a relationship with the judges on this court that would allow you to be able to work with those judges.
Yes, Your Honor. Yes, sir. I did.
Whatever you want to call me. No,
I believe I do. I've worked with several of them in the past, including Janet Benavides, the Chief Justice Dori Garza, Nora Longoria. We've all worked together in our opinions, and that's where you'd see the split. With the exception, I think, 1 or 2 cases, the cases were all unanimous that were put through on as far as my docket was concerned.
has there been anything since you went on the bench or since the elections where you weren't returned to the bench that would make you think that those relationships have been damaged in some way and would give you concern?
Oh, well, it was a hard election, obviously, and I lost the election. That would probably be the only thing I could think of as I sit here. Okay. Otherwise, all the judges on that court, including myself, are strict constructionists of the law and try to do our very best.
Okay. Are you familiar with some concerns that have been mentioned about testimony you gave in front of a House Judiciary Committee a few years ago, or I don't remember exactly when it was? Are you familiar with that, concerns about that? Where there's at least been some speculation that maybe you either made a mistake in what you testified to or said something that wasn't entirely accurate.
No, Your Honor. No, sir. I believe what I said was accurate.
You can always tell a lawyer.
That's true.
Your honor comes naturally to you. Yeah.
It does.
Hey, Paul, I see you have a question about the confirmation process and what happens next and what Secretary Whitley has to go through. So right now he has to testify in front of the committee, answer any questions, and then in order to continue the process, he has to be voted out of the committee by a majority. Then things get a little bit more complicated. He has to survive a 2/3 majority vote in the Texas Senate. Well, 2/3 of the senators present on the day of the vote. So, if this becomes a party split, where Republicans are all for him and Democrats are all against him, he does not have enough votes because Republicans do not control 2/3 of the Senate. That being said, all he would need is to, convince a few Democrats or change a few minds. But he faces what could be a bit of an uphill battle in the full Senate. Now, again, it's important to note that he only needs 2/3 votes of the lawmakers present on that day of the vote. So not 2/3 of the full Senate, but just 2/3 of the full Senate present. I don't think the House plays any role in this at all. It goes from the committee to the Senate, and then they're conformed. We'll have a sense of just exactly how angry or how resistant Democrats are going to be towards confirmation today in this confirmation hearing. We'll see what happens in a few minutes. Hope that helped you, Paul. If you have any more questions, let us know.
Good morning. When you said Mr. Nixon, I wanted to say I'm not a crook.
I know, sorry. Dixon, thank you. I was getting there.
Good morning, Madam Chair and Vice Chairman and esteemed senators. My name is William James Dixon. I've been appointed to be the Criminal District Attorney for Navarrete County. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I hope at the end of this that I will have your full confidence and be able to be confirmed in a prompt manner. This moment is bittersweet for me. My boss was a wonderful man who was beloved by the whole community. He was a member of the Boys and Girls Club. He was the chair of that. Almost every booster club he was a member of. Everyone loved him because it didn't matter what race, religion you were. He was part of the community, and he was wonderful to my family.
Okay, I see a question in the comments from Stacy about how he got the information regarding the voter fraud or the possible voter fraud. So what the Texas Secretary of State's office did was they took a list of registered voters and they compared it to a list of people who obtained driver's license in Texas using some sort of immigration document, be it a green card or something else that indicated they were not a permanent citizen, but they were here legally, but they were not a U.S. citizen. And they found 96,000 weak matches, as they were described, implying that there were possibly people who registered to vote using driver's licenses obtained with immigration documents. It's important to note that there are a ton of naturalized citizens every year, and that this list, was labeled weak matches, but the information was obtained via working with the DPS, I believe. I hope that answers your question. If not, please ask it in a different way, or please let me know what's confusing, and I'll address it again. Thanks.
Many cases, and I have a passion for seeking justice and being merciful when it's merited. Thank you. And if anyone has any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Dixon. And in case Mr. Thompson's family is watching, our condolences to them and to the community. It's always sad when such a great man and leader departs this world. So we appreciate your coming today. I was just wondering, are there any community issues relating to your office that you're aware of? And if so, do you have any plans to address them?
I'm not aware of any community issues. I think the Navarrete County Criminal District Attorney Office, because of our great leadership in the past, is very well respected by everyone. Lowell got along with everyone, and he was a peacemaker with all the different factions. In a small county, a lot of people are vying for power in different ways, and I hope to be similar to him and trying to be a peacemaker and help everyone get along.
Okay. Members, any questions? Senator Watson.
I really just have a comment, and first of all, our nominee here worked as a research assistant to a dear friend of mine when he was president of Baylor University, and that was Bill Underwood. But I want, for the record, to say it is not a reason I would ever oppose anybody that they make me feel old when they point that they were an intern to a judge that was one of my classmates, and that was Judge Mayfield. So thank you for being here. I look forward to supporting you.
Thank you.
Are you old or not? We're not going into that. It's not in the jurisdiction of this committee, and we need to move on. Okay.
Oh, wow. On that note, members, any other questions? Yes, Senator Menendez.
Madam Chair, I just want to, first of all, thank you for the indulgence allowing me. I just want to congratulate and thank the nominee. I think, Mr. Dixon, last session I had the privilege of being on this committee. I'm just impressed so much by your demeanor, your humility, and your concern for the community. And I don't know you, but I'm impressed by how you come before this committee. I look forward to voting for you once the committee sees fit to send your nomination to the floor.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Members, any other questions? And no public testimony, so thank you, Mr. Dixon. We appreciate your service to the state. At this time, we'd like for Secretary David Whitley to come to the witness table. All right, when you're ready, Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Congratulations on your appointment.
Thank you.
Look forward to working with all of you. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. My name is David Whitley.
Okay, David Whitley.
Texas Secretary of State, and I'm deeply honored and, especially after the last 2 weeks, humbled to have been appointed by the governor to succeed the 111 outstanding men and women who have served in this position. After just 2 months on the job, I can say with confidence that our agency employs some of the finest public servants that Texas has to offer, all of whom prioritize their duty to the people of Texas above all else. You may know that I was born and raised in Alice, about 40 miles west of Corpus, and I grew up with my dad working at a lumber yard and my mom teaching school. What you may not know is how much of an impact my mom has had on my life. She taught her entire life until she retired and spent the last half of her teaching career in charge of a middle school life skills class for severely disabled children, including blind children, children with autism, and children with Down syndrome. She named it the WOW class, which stood for Whitley's Original Wonder Kids. She taught them to cook for themselves, clean for themselves, and care for themselves. Life skills some of us are better at than others, but these kids needed to learn to live on their own. And for the most part, their families didn't have a lot of money. And one year, my mom made a decision that would shape my life forever. At Christmas, instead of buying presents for our family, my parents bought Christmas presents for her students in the WOW class. And while we didn't receive Christmas presents that year, we received something much greater. That Christmas and the following Christmases with the WOW class left an indelible mark on my life. That we are all called to serve God by serving others. For my family then, it was serving my mom's WOW class. And for me now, it's serving Texas taxpayers and voters. I've been a public servant my entire career. Since completing my undergrad education, I've served in the Texas Attorney General's office, the Texas Senate, the U.S. Bankruptcy Court, and the Governor's office. And I hope to bring the knowledge and approach I've cultivated in those capacities to my role as Secretary of State. That approach is one of collaboration. For the last 4 years, I've been proud to collaborate with all of you to help place outstanding servants throughout the state of Texas. And I hope we can continue to work together for the benefit of all Texans. Over the past 2 weeks, my office has been engaged in a new list maintenance process, one of many that our office helps counties conduct, meant to give counties the information they need to make sure our voter rolls are up to date and only include eligible voters. Much like other list maintenance activities we conduct on a regular basis, it takes a collaborative effort between our state and local partners to share the types of information we have access to under the law to develop a sustainable process of sharing information going forward. So with a spirit of collaboration, my office conducted 10 trainings for the counties on how to handle this specific data. Then we transparently and publicly announced the election advisory, and we sent the counties the data we had to begin their work on maintaining an accurate voter roll. We have to get this right. I believe we owe it to Texas voters. And let me be clear, the Secretary of State's office is not a law enforcement agency. We have no ability to investigate or prosecute any illegal activity. What we can do is provide our counties and law enforcement with the best possible data to ensure the accuracy of our voter rolls. Going forward, we will continue to work with DPS and our county voter registrars on any updated information that is available to us to help the counties with this list maintenance activity. The Secretary of State is first and foremost the Chief Elections Officer, but I'm also a custodian of official records, including thousands of business, corporate, and government filings. We also commission public notaries responsible for publishing the Texas Register, which allows the public to review the state agency rulemaking process and ensures full transparency of the rules and regulations that govern them on an everyday basis. On the global stage, Texas is a leader, and as Secretary of State, I hope to continue to build on the international relationships that have strengthened our state's economy and to explore even more ways to collaborate on matters of diplomacy and trade, especially with our largest trade partner, Mexico. I'm committed to ensuring high transparency as well as good customer service to the Texans that rely on us day in and day out to run their business and state agencies, have their documents authenticated, and conduct their elections. I look forward to working collaboratively with all of you to carry out the duties of this office. I'm happy to take any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Whitley, and your mom is obviously an impressive lady, and we appreciate her public service as well.
Thank you.
I know we probably are going to have lots of questions, so I'm going to start and then I'll defer to my other senators. But let's just backtrack a little bit. What do you consider the two primary responsibilities of your position as Texas Secretary of State?
I have a primary responsibility to help counties administer elections. I think the Constitution lays out some duties about collecting records and ensuring that the governor's records and the legislature's records are accurately kept. Over the years, by statute, election duties have been added to the Secretary of State's office. In the election sphere, first and foremost, we maintain a statewide list of registered voters by law. The federal law requires it, and state law requires it. But the counties handle the registration of actual voters and the maintenance of those lists. We help them in that process. We're a conduit of information. We help them administer their elections as well. And one of the things that Senator Campbell pointed out is I had the pleasure of sitting down with both state party chairs a few weeks ago to talk about the administration of primary elections, which are administered by the parties. And it was a very, very productive conversation.
Thank you. And just drilling a little bit more down on kind of, the recent flurry of controversy over your office, please walk us through kind of step by step the measure your office has been taking on this project, and share in as much detail as you can regarding when the process began and where the process goes from here.
Certainly, Madam Chair. It's important to point out that on the day that we announced the election advisory, which I believe was my second press release as Secretary of State, we cited a statute right at the very beginning, and I believe I provided that election advisory as an exhibit to the committee. It's a provision of the Transportation Code. I believe it's 730.005. It requires DPS to share personal information with the Secretary of State for specific purposes, and one of those is maintaining voter registration. That requirement is what led to this list maintenance process. In, I think, about March of 2018, if I'm not mistaken, DPS and our office began the process of trying to determine how to conduct list maintenance activity, specifically with regards to the qualification to vote that you must be a citizen. We perform many list maintenance activities. One that we perform or transmit county information to the counties on almost every day are finally convicted felons. We receive that information and give it to the counties for them to perform that list maintenance. It's very similar to this process, but this is the first time that we've actually done it with this data set for that specific qualification under statute. DPS shared data with us. The best data that they had on who in their database was not a citizen. And I think about 2 weeks after I came on board, our office began training the counties on how to handle this specific data, because at that point, DPS had transmitted some data to our vendor that administers the team database, which is the statewide voter registration database. And we knew that at some point we would be receiving those matches. We didn't know exactly when, but we thought it would be sometime in January. That was part of the briefings that I received when I came into the office. And so we wanted to make sure that the counties were trained and prepared. Our office conducted 10 trainings for the counties. I believe almost 200 of the counties attended those trainings, but they were the trainings were familiar because they talked about the list maintenance activities that are performed. I mentioned felons earlier. One of the other list maintenance activities is when people die. Another one is when people become mentally incapacitated, and these are all requirements to be registered to vote in the state of Texas. And another list maintenance activity that's actually very similar to this one is when we receive from clerks of the court jury summons, in which somebody's been summoned to serve on a jury, but they check that they can't because they're not a citizen. That's an example of somebody affirmatively providing data that they are not a citizen. And so the counties compare those to the voter rolls. As soon as we got the matches from our vendor, we wanted to make sure that we got the data in the hands of somebody that could actually do something with it, because our office, as I said before, has no investigative authority. It was important to me that before we do that we concluded training the counties. The day after that 10th and final training for the counties, we transmitted that data and announced it publicly in transparency, the top line numbers from the data, and the advisory that was included along with our press release hit on a lot of what was in the training, and provides the framework for what this list maintenance activity is, which is now being performed by the counties. And we serve, as I said earlier, as a conduit of information between the counties and DPS. And the counties have information at their disposal that we simply do not. I mean, for example, Harris County has in their database records of when folks have become naturalized citizens. The Secretary of State's office does not. And so when Harris County has found that data in relation to what we transmitted to the counties, we've assisted them on making sure that those folks stay on the rolls. Our goals are twofold with this list maintenance process. Number one, first and foremost, we want to make sure that anybody who is qualified to vote has every opportunity to do so. And number two, we want to make sure that our voter rolls are as accurate as possible.
Thank you. So you would agree with the fact that it's your primary responsibility as the Secretary of State to comply with state and federal election laws regarding voting rights?
I would agree with that. I took an oath to uphold the laws of the United States and of this state, so I wholeheartedly agree with that, Senator.
And then also I believe you're required by law to make every effort possible to protect the integrity of the ballot box and legal voting by taking steps to prevent illegal voting. Would that be correct?
It depends on how that's characterized. It's important to point out that we don't have any investigative authority. So what we can do is ensure that the voter lists are as accurate as possible, that the counties have the assistance that they need to either conduct their elections or maintain their voter rolls. It's not our role to investigate.
So in that election advisory, 2019-12, issued to county voter registrars on January 25th, 2019, your office cites section 18.0681 of the election code. I'm just going to read you a little excerpt from it. It says, in keeping with general guidelines set out under section 18.0681 election code, our office sought to create the strongest matching criteria that produces the least possible impact on eligible Texas voters while fulfilling the responsibility to manage the voter rolls. It's my understanding that Section 18.0681 of the Election Code was created by House Bill 4034 from the 85th legislative session, a bill that passed the Senate 31-0 and it passed the House 141-1. Would that be consistent with your memory?
I would have to go back and look at that legislative history, Madam Chair. I wouldn't venture a guess at this time, but that sounds accurate, yes.
Members, as I recall, House Bill 4034 relating to certain voter registration information had bipartisan support. I had my staff pull the witness list for House Bill 4034 when it was heard in the Senate State Affairs Committee on May 18, 2017. Testifying for House Bill 4034 were Ed Johnson, Director of the Harris County Clerk's Office, Glenn Maxey, Legislative Director of the Texas Democratic Party, Alan Vera, Chairman, Harris County Republican Party Ballot Security. There was no testimony against this bill. Registering but not testifying for House Bill 4034 were Chris Davis, Treasurer of the Texas Association of Elections Administrators, Bill Fairbrother, Legislative Chair of the Texas Republican County Chairmen's Association. Registering but not testifying against House Bill 4034 was Brad Parsons, campaign consultant. Registering but not testifying on House Bill 4034 was Keith Ingram, Director, Elections Division, Texas Secretary of State. So, Mr. Whitley, is it your belief that you are carrying out the duties prescribed to your office by House Bill 4034 with the issuance of Election Advisory 2019-12?
Anything that our office did that is in conjunction with this election advisory was completely according to state and federal law. Yes, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Secretary. At that time, I'd like to open up questions. Senator Watson, I believe you're first.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. I want to start off by looking at the list that you indicated in your press release and that was sent to the counties that indicated that there were 95,000 individuals and that were non-U.S. citizens that had registered, that had a matching voter registration record, and approximately 58,000 of whom had voted in one or more Texas elections. You with me on that?
Yes, sir.
We know for certain today that that list was wrong, don't we?
I've heard that reported, Senator, but what my characterization of the list is, as I mentioned before, that this list maintenance process is collaborative. We don't have a goal number that we're trying to reach. We're trying to ensure that the lists are as accurate as possible. If that means that somebody needs to stay on the rolls, if one person needs to stay on the rolls out of that 95,000, we are absolutely committed to making sure that the counties have the data they need to make that happen.
Well, I think I was asking a slightly different question than maybe you just answered. And my question is that if the assumption in the press release that was sent out was that 95,000 individuals were non-U.S. citizens, 58,000 who voted may have voted in a Texas election, indicating, or at least implicitly stating, that 58,000 non-citizens had voted. We know for certain today, and your office knows for certain today, that that's incorrect.
Here's what I want to emphasize. I've seen many different reports and statements about the top numbers that were released 2 weeks ago. And important to remember that ever since then, the counties have been working to ensure that their lists are as accurate as possible, and us working with them. So if you're asking whether or not there have been any confirmations that any of the 95,000 are in fact U.S. citizens, we have received information from counties that yes, they are, and our guidance to them is do not send them the notice of examination letter, keep them on the rolls. You've now, because the counties have the autonomy and the authority to, if they have reason to believe that somebody needs to stay on the rolls, they keep them. If they have the reason to believe that somebody is not qualified, then according to our election advisory process, that is when the 30-day letter is then sent. They're not automatically removed.
Mr. Secretary, are you willing to admit, as you sit here today, that there were any mistakes made in sending out that list of 95,000 people?
I think, Senator, what I would say to you today is that when we received the data from DPS, we were confident that it was their best data to determine who in their database were non-citizens. And we compared that to the team database to see who of those folks were registered to vote. And that's where we came up with that top line.
So you're not willing to say that any mistakes were made by your office in releasing those 95,000?
I will readily level with you that we can always improve the process. But the data is what the data is, and we were confident that that was the best data that we could get from DPS.
When you receive data from DPS, is it true that that data, at least some of that data, around 20,000 roughly names in that data, or 20,000 different individuals, that it showed that they were citizens?
I've seen that reported. And I want to make sure that I give you exactly what I was made aware of and what steps we took. So I want to describe what happened in a couple of days after we transmitted the data to the counties. The announcement in the press release and the election advisory went out on, I believe, the 25th. Over the weekend, when the team database slows down, we transmitted that information to the counties, and that's when this list maintenance process begun in earnest, so that the counties can take a look at the data that they have on these folks that we do not. Part of the feedback that we received from the counties is, hey, I'm comparing this DPS data to what we have for these folks, and it looks like we need to keep some of them on the rolls. And Senator, I'm 100% committed that when something like that is communicated to our office, that we're going to take steps to make sure that people stay on the rolls. So we made sure that we got back with DPS, and we're talking with the counties constantly to make sure, number one, that anybody that they have on their rolls that they believe is a citizen, whether they're looking at the DPS data or naturalization certificates or anything else that they have, we're trying to make sure that they stay on the rolls.
I want to focus on the
Sure.
data that you had in the Secretary of State's office before we go to the county, and we'll talk about some of that in a minute. Is it your testimony as you sit here today that the data that was provided to you by DPS in December of 2018, and that was when it was provided, right? Finally provided.
I don't know when the data was sent to our vendor for matching. I know we received the matches from our vendor, a day or two before we did the press release. I don't know when we got it.
Let me ask my question very simply.
Sure.
And it bugs me a little bit that you don't know those dates, particularly under the circumstances of what we're now dealing with. But having said that, do you know, as the Secretary of State, whether the data that was provided by DPS in instances of around 20,000 people, do you know whether it also showed that those people were citizens?
I don't know, Senator, the specifics about how the data is analyzed. What I do know 100% is that we immediately received feedback from the counties.
And that's not what I'm talking about.
About the data.
I'm talking about the data that you got and had in the Secretary of State's office before you made the decision to send 95,000 names to the counties. Have you sat down with the leadership of the Department of Public Safety and asked them to walk you through the data that they provided to your office?
Our two offices did sit down, Senator. I don't remember exactly the day, but it was after this list maintenance process started. I think that the process can be improved. I think that the data can be improved, but at the time that we had the data from DPS, I was confident that it was the best data. And I think that I will make this commitment to you that if there are any improvements to be made, either in the process in the Secretary of State's office or in communication with the counties or DPS and their data processes, that I am absolutely 100% committed to making that happen. If that includes changing how DPS is pulling their data, I'm absolutely committed to that. If it includes changing how we're matching with the team database, I'm absolutely committed to that.
Before you issued the 95,000 names, did you, as Secretary of State, sit down with anyone at DPS to make sure you understood the data they were providing you so that you wouldn't be putting out any names where you would already know they were citizens?
My first day was December 17th, and I received a briefing that this process had been going on since March with DPS, and that the data had been transmitted to our vendor for matching on 3 very strong criteria. And I'll describe those to you. Number 1 is first name, last name, full social. Number 2, first name, last name, and your full ID number that DPS issues, whether it's a driver's license or an ID. And number 3, first name, last 4 of your social, and your date of birth. And I was confident that because of how long the process had gone on between DPS and our office, that set of data was the most accurate assessment that we could get from DPS on who was not a citizen in their database.
So let's talk about that a minute. Who in your office, who in the Secretary of State's office was the manager for this program?
Keith Ingram is the director of the Elections Division. He's got a lot of folks working under him. The main interfacing employees in my short time there that I've seen talking with DPS about this have been Christina Atkins. I've talked with DPS. Keith has talked with DPS. And Betsy Shanoff, who's talked with DPS significantly. And I believe I've provided the committee some emails between her and DPS.
If I look at those emails, one of the things I note is that the first request seems to come from the Secretary of State's office to DPS for data in March of 2018. And I think that's what you testified to.
That sounds, yes, sir.
And as I understand it, in March of 2018, a request was made to DPS, and what happened was DPS provided a response that was in the millions of hits. Is that correct?
The number was significantly larger than the top line numbers that we announced in our press release, yes.
And that was in part because DPS was providing data of both active and inactive licenses.
Correct.
And so that we're clear on how that works, if someone goes in to a DPS office and indicates that they want to get a driver's license, and they check that they're not a citizen, they're still entitled to get a license by showing some sort of proof that they are lawfully in the United States.
That is my understanding of how it works at DPS, yes, sir.
And if they are here on a short-term or on a visa, something of that nature, they get a special license. But if they're here as a permanent resident, then they get basically the same license you and I would get as citizens.
I think that's correct.
Once that occurs, a person can later become a naturalized citizen.
That's correct.
And if they become a naturalized citizen, they have no obligation to tell DPS about that. Is that correct?
That is my understanding as well, yes, Senator.
So when you ask, when your office, although you were not there, and I understand that, when your office in March first asked for information, and DPS provided them an answer to what DPS thought they were asking, they gave both active licenses and inactive, so that it ended up being a huge response. And your office, the Secretary of State's office at that point, sometime probably in April, said this is not what we're asking for, and then asked for a different batch which was just active. Is that correct?
That's correct.
As I understand it, what your office, and looking at the emails that we have, is your office then indicated that there was some discussion between DPS and the Secretary of State's office about when that data could be provided, and it was agreed that it would be provided in December of 2018.
I think that sounds right, Senator. I'll have to look at the email one more time, but that does sound right.
Fair enough. But the point being, or one of the points being, that when you say this was a year-long process, it really was March and April. Whatever data the Secretary of State's office thought they wanted, they realized, oh, we may not be asking the right questions. We may be doing something different than what we may be trying to achieve a goal, and we don't know how to ask for this. And it was decided that it would be from April until December before the new data would be obtained and received.
That's certainly a reasonable characterization based on the emails that I provided to the committee. What I don't know is how many times folks spoke on the phone or otherwise about what was going on and what sort of nature of data was being analyzed.
And Mr. Secretary, part of the reason I want to ask these questions is because whether this was going on before you ever got there or not, you ultimately did get there, and you were the one that issued the 95,000 names to everyone. And part of what I'm trying to drill down to is, what did you do to verify before you did such a thing? And now we get to December, and I'm going to go back to the question I've tried to ask a couple of times. Do you know, if you were to see, first of all, did you yourself ever look at what DPS provided?
I've looked at the data since the list maintenance activity begun, but once we got it back from our vendor and I received assurances that it was accurate.
Who is your vendor?
The vendor for the team database is PCC.
And what did you ask the vendor to do?
I myself did not speak with the vendor, but the vendor was asked to take the DPS data and match it on the 3 criteria that I told you earlier to the statewide voter registration database.
Okay. I want to go back to the DPS data. Did you ever yourself look at the DPS data before issuing the press release?
I do not recall. I don't think I did, but I don't recall, Senator.
Since that time, have you sat down with anyone and said, show me the data, so that you could personally determine whether the data also demonstrated that there were a number of people that were citizens that you were getting ready to send out and say, or at least imply, they may not be?
I've sat down with my staff and I've spoken with DPS about the data many times since this list maintenance activity begun, to ensure that if any adjustments need to be made, which many reports are suggesting that they do, that DPS absolutely makes those adjustments, and that we in turn make adjustments so that this is as accurate as possible.
Has anyone told you that the data DPS provided the Secretary of State's office revealed that tens of thousands of people on that list were in fact citizens?
I read that in the paper, But what my data, what the DPS data that we received from them, what we asked for and what I believe we received was their most accurate list of non-citizens.
So
it wasn't until we heard from the counties when they started comparing it to information that they have that we do not, that we were made aware that some adjustments might need to be made on DPS data or how the process is working, which is why that soon after we transmitted the data, we made sure that anybody who the counties believed was a citizen absolutely stayed on the rolls.
Mr. Secretary, you are aware, go back to the hypothetical we were just walking through. If Jane Doe, a permanent resident of the United States living in Texas, but not a citizen, goes into a DPS office and gets a driver's license and indicates that she is not a citizen, you're aware that DPS verifies her status in this country?
Yes.
Once that's done and she's issued a license, if she later becomes a naturalized citizen and comes back to get another license and indicates now she's a citizen, are you aware that DPS's data would show that she's a citizen?
I'm not aware of that. In your scenario, and I want to make sure I'm hearing your question correctly, that she comes back and renews and,
Sure.
and gets a license?
Yes.
I don't know how that's handled at the customer service level at DPS. I don't know how it affects their data.
So it might surprise you if your staff in the Secretary of State's office had information from DPS that indicated a person had at one time been a permanent resident, non-citizen, and later became a citizen. That would surprise you then, wouldn't it?
It would be surprising in that we relied on the initial set of data to start this list maintenance activity with the understanding that it was as accurate as possible. But certainly, Senator, one of the most important parts about this activity is that it's collaborative. And I'm absolutely, as I said before, if adjustments need to be made on how DPS is pulling their data or analyzing it, or how our office is analyzing our data, or how we're communicating with the counties, I'm absolutely committed to it so that these lists are as accurate as possible.
Will you agree with me that at a minimum, the press release that you sent out on January 25th creates the appearance that you were accusing people of acting in an illegal manner?
Senator, I've heard that's been said, but what I want to make clear is that the Secretary of State's office has no investigative or prosecutorial authority. And that's why it was important for me to get the data into hands of the counties that do have that investigative authority, and to folks that actually have the statutory authority to do something with it.
Well, let's talk about your press release then. If all you were trying to do was a maintenance activity, you don't put out press releases on every maintenance activity, do you?
Not to my knowledge. We haven't done any on the list maintenance activities that are currently ongoing today. I think we receive felony information every day from DPS.
Right. What DPS does is it provides you with, if anybody in the state has been convicted of a felony, they provide you that information on a daily basis, and then they provide your office that information on an annual basis in October of each year. Is that right?
I think that's right. Yes, sir.
And then if you get information, for example, as you indicated regarding jury summons, where someone says, I can't serve on a jury because I'm not a citizen, that would be maintenance activity as well.
Yes, Senator.
So the only time that you're aware of the Secretary of State's office issuing a press release is when it was saying that it may have found people that were non-citizens and was sending it to the counties for those counties to look at whether or not they ought to purge those people from the voting rolls.
Senator, it was important to me that once we had the data and once we had completed training the counties 10 times, that we were transparent about the process, which is why we issued the press release and attached the election advisory to that press release.
Right, and so in doing that, you also put in that press release, well, before we talk about what's in the press release, at the same time that you did what you have been referring to as maintenance activity, working with the counties to see if in fact you were right about the 95,000 people. You also referred those names to the Office of the Attorney General.
Correct.
And you put in the press release a reason for your immediately, as you say in the press release, you use the word immediate, there's a sense of urgency apparently to what you were doing. You say that upon receipt of this information, the Texas Secretary of State's office immediately provided the data in its possession to the Texas Attorney General's office. And I want to pause there and say, in a routine maintenance activity, what was the sense of immediacy and urgency when you are telling us now that the goal was to get better information from the counties, which you felt were in a better position to get that information?
I want to make sure I understand that you are asking about the reason for the immediacy of getting the data to the Attorney General's office?
Right.
Okay.
You tell us that all you were doing here was performing a maintenance activity, and you wanted to get the information in the hands of the counties because they would be able to get you better information than you were able to get, because you say you don't have tools to do that kind of thing. Why then was it immediately necessary to refer it to a law enforcement agency?
And Senator, I appreciate your clarification. This list maintenance activity is the first one that's been conducted for this specific qualification to vote, other than jury summons, which is also on not the citizen qualification. And so, knowing that this was the first time, and I want to be clear that this is, the DPS data was current data. It was a current snapshot. As you pointed out, no inactive records, and it was a current snapshot of the team database. It was important to me that because this had never taken place before, and because we anticipated the data being larger than that of, for example, jury summons, which over the last 4 years, I think we've performed, or the counties have performed 1,000 list maintenance activity or cancellations because of those investigations, which works exactly the same as this process. It was important to me that I got that data in the hands of somebody who can do something with it, and it's a large number. And our goal is to ensure that, in the election advisory mentions that this is a preliminary data set. The preliminary data set is this large number, and the reason why it's characterized as preliminary is because the goal is to do this on a regular basis, so that some of the shortcomings that you've pointed out in the lag between somebody getting a driver's license at DPS and then becoming naturalized are minimized to the largest extent possible, so that we are minimizing the number of times that somebody would have to be investigated who has actually become a citizen. If you're doing it every month, then that obviously minimizes that risk. So in answering your question fully, Senator, my goal was to ensure that folks that could actually do something with it had this data in their hands. The Attorney General has statewide jurisdiction in enforcing election law. We do not. The counties have jurisdiction to investigate. We do not.
But I'll just say it to you frankly. If what you're doing is, as you suggest, trying to get the data in the hands of someone who could do something with it in terms of a maintenance activity, and you weren't at least attempting to create the appearance of illegal activity, then there's no reason or explanation for immediately referring 95,000 people to the Office of the Attorney General, and as you say, because they have the authority to investigate or prosecute alleged illegal activity in connection with an election. That could have waited until you had the verification of numbers and you actually had something, put it in the hands of someone who could do something with it from a maintenance activity and could give you the data that you claim that you really wanted to receive. There was no reason to make an immediate referral, was there?
I'm not familiar with how the Attorney General's office conducts these specific election code investigations, but I can tell you, Senator, that 100% my reason for transmitting this data to the Attorney General's office was so that we could ensure that these lists are as accurate as possible, and that if the Attorney General had some sort of data that, again, we do not, and maybe it's consistent with what the counties do, that one way or the other, whether or not somebody needs to stay on the rolls or whether or not somebody needs to have a 30-day examination letter sent, that the people that can actually do something with it, if the counties are maintaining those voter registration lists, that data is in the hands of somebody that can do something with it, because we don't have it.
On the same day that you issued the press release and referred these 95,000 people to the Office of the Attorney General for investigation or prosecution of alleged illegal activity, there were a number of social media tweets that went out on that same day. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Including the very person you had referred these to, the Attorney General's office. And the campaign, as I understand it, the campaign account of the Attorney General sent out what was entitled a voter fraud alert. Are you familiar with that?
I've seen it, yes, Senator.
And the governor's office, or the governor, put out one where he thanks he says, thanks to Attorney General Paxton and the Secretary of State for uncovering and investigating this illegal vote registration. At that time, you've indicated you weren't considering this to be illegal vote registration. Is that right?
I want to be very careful, Senator, to not comment or interpret the words that others have said about what my office has done. And I want to make sure that it's clear that the Attorney General's office has investigative and prosecutorial authority, and we do not. But I'm not going to venture a guess as to reasoning behind anything on social media. Which
did your office do anything to clarify that you were not alleging that these people had engaged in illegal activity?
Yes.
What did you do?
In response to, I believe, media requests, and obviously requests from members of this committee and members of the House of Representatives, I had several meetings, and we provided comment to the media, one of which was very early on, and anecdotally, I don't have it in front of me, but I believe that Harris County had identified some citizens on those rolls and they made sure that they kept them on the rolls and that they didn't cancel the records. And we made it very clear in our comment that we're okay with that. That's part of this process.
Well, I want to go back to my question, though. While I completely understand you can't be held responsible for what others might put out in Twitter, and there was more than that, than the ones I've mentioned, obviously, prominent people that may have tweeted. And I fully understand you can't be responsible for what they might tweet. My question was really, did you put out any public statements along the lines of your initial press release that said, I am not alleging any illegal activity?
To my knowledge, Senator, I'll have to go back and look at all the different media requests that we had. I know I clearly communicated that in some of my private meetings with members of the legislature who asked about it. And I'm happy to communicate that to you now, that we don't have any investigative authority.
Let's talk about where things stand right now. How many people do you believe were incorrectly included on the list of the approximately 95,000?
This maintenance activity is ongoing, Senator. It's important that it's as accurate as possible. The counties don't have a timeline on when they're completing this maintenance activity. We're working with them every day on it. The communication is healthy. I don't want to comment on what any of the final numbers are, or any broad-based assertions about the numbers, because all the counties are at different parts of the list maintenance activity.
So what is the best tool that the counties have for that you don't have for being able to make a determination along those lines?
I think the counties have local resources at their disposal. I think it's important to distinguish the difference between an online county, which is a term of art that's been used in relation to our team database. An online county is one that keeps their voter registration records completely within the team database, and an offline county is one that keeps their records on their own, but they're required to communicate with the team database so that the Secretary of State can comply with state and federal law and maintain that statewide list. Some of the offline counties have data fields for their voters that we do not. For example, Harris County, some of the other counties have naturalization fields. We do not have that data, and that's why this list maintenance process is most efficiently and most accurately completed at the county level.
One of the tools that they have, and it's indicated in your advisory to them, is the use of what is called a notice of examination of citizenship. Is that right?
Yes, Senator.
And what that does, as I understand it, is if the county is, if someone is on your list of 95,000 and you send it to County A can send a notice of examination of citizenship to that person, and then that person has 30 days to respond. And if the person fails to respond or fails to provide proof of citizenship, but if they just fail to respond, then they're purged from the voter roll. Is that right?
The counties first have to, I think under the law, and I want to make sure that I get this correct with you, they must ensure that they have a reason to believe that somebody needs to be removed from the rolls.
Well,
and what that is the data that they have combined with the data that we transmitted to them. So that's at their discretion as to whether or not to send that 30-day letter. But it's important to remember also that some of the other list maintenance activities that we perform, and I'll get to answer your question,
okay.
Treat some of these matches that we make at the state level that we transmit to the counties as strong matches, and they're automatically taken off the rolls. This is not that process. The election advisory made it clear that they're to be treated under the law as weak matches and require that letter be sent, and no one should be automatically removed from the rolls at all because of this list maintenance process.
Okay, so I want to go back to my, you've caused me to want to ask another question.
Sure.
So let me do that. You also, in that same advisory, told them these are some of the strongest possible matching criteria. And you also ended that paragraph by saying, meaning we believe the data we are providing can be acted on in nearly all circumstances. So when you provided them the advisory, you also told them you think this is the strongest possible matching criteria, and we believe the data we are providing can be acted on in nearly all circumstances. Is that correct?
That's correct, and it was in the context of making matches for the purpose of counties putting people on their voter rolls.
Right.
So when somebody registers at the county level, and it's an online county or an offline county, and they're communicating with us, and they need to know whether or not somebody who has registered is actually in the system, whether they're moving or otherwise, and we're making those matches in team. Those are the strongest matching, and I think it's characterized as some of the strongest matching criteria.
That's what I said, some of the strongest possible matching criteria.
That we use, and that the data is actionable in nearly all cases, is in the context of, certainly when you're registering voters, it's actionable. So in a list maintenance process, we should also be able to rely on the accuracy of those matches.
I think that's what I was saying as well. So now, with that being said, if someone sends a notice of examination, let's go back to what I was asking about before. Someone sends a notice of examination, because that's the tool if you have a strong match, or meaning, and you believe the data you're providing can be acted on, and they need to act on that, and they say, I'm sending you a notice of examination. If the person that receives that notice of examination doesn't respond to that notice, that will result in 30 days. That will result in that person being purged from the voter rolls. Is that right?
By state law, if somebody does not respond to that 30-day notice of examination letter, they are removed from the voter rolls.
So the answer to my question is yes.
You used a word that we have not used throughout this entire process.
And that is purged?
Yes, Senator.
Okay,
and so what I want to make sure is also
purged and removed would be what?
The connotation.
Okay.
We're trying to make sure this is accurate as possible.
So let me ask the question again. If someone doesn't respond in 30 days, for whatever reason, they'll be removed from the rolls.
But first, when they're removed from the rolls, they have to be sent a cancellation letter as well. So there's not just one piece of correspondence. There are at least two, and they're required to be sent not only to the address that the county has on file for your voter registration, but any forwardable addresses that they have on file for you. So you could get multiple pieces of correspondence from the county, both on the examination letter and on the notice of cancellation. That's by law.
And again, if someone, let's say someone, well, let me ask you the question. How many, do you know, or have you sought to find out how many notices of examination have been sent to people who are citizens? So we're basically incorrectly on the list.
I do know that as soon as we got feedback from the counties that they had reason to believe that somebody on the list was a citizen, that we communicated to them to not send the 30-day letter, certainly. And we've also received anecdotal news reports that some counties have sent out their 30-day letters, and they're communicating with us, but I would need to visit with our elections folks on exactly where each county is in the process.
Yeah, I've actually read that at least in Galveston County, 62, all I know is what I've read there, but I was hoping you would know more based on what reports you were getting. But in Galveston County, at least 62 people who are citizens and registered to vote have received or were sent notices of examination, but you don't know what the status of that might be statewide right now.
I don't. I'm happy to check on it and get back with you, Senator. But the important thing to remember is, even assuming that all 62 in that news report, that all 62 are citizens, if DPS or any other agency or the counties have any data or information that those folks need to stay on the rolls, then the county has the autonomy and the legal authority to keep those people on the rolls, which is why we've been a conduit of information between DPS and the counties and ensuring that those rolls are accurate and that nobody's unnecessarily being removed.
But they would have to go through a process to rewind that, right?
The process for rewinding is the county has a reason to believe that somebody needs to stay on the rolls. They have the autonomy to make that happen.
Okay. I would like to know how many people have received notice, and here's what my concern is. My concern is that folks are going about their day-to-day living. They're working, they're raising their kids, they may be sick. In Galveston County, they may be rebuilding after a hurricane. They may be doing all those things. Or frankly, they may get mail that from the government that they just don't look at. I know there are a lot of folks that get toll bills that they don't pay attention to. And they don't pay attention to this, and then they find themselves off the rolls, removed from the rolls, when they shouldn't have been on the list to begin with. Do you share that concern?
What I'm more concerned about, and I share that your concern is consistent with mine, that we want the list to be as accurate as possible, and that we want to make sure that everybody who's qualified to vote has every opportunity to do so. If those folks, for some reason, if you throw away the notice and you throw away, or your husband or wife or roommate doesn't show you the mail for some reason, you don't get it. There are mechanisms in law that will ensure that you are not prevented the right to vote. There are a couple. I'm happy to go into them.
Well, that wasn't my question, but I'm happy to have you describe them. But the point being, even with the ways to avoid that, people would be removed from the rolls, and they would have the ability, perhaps, to be restored, but they shouldn't have been removed from the rolls to begin with.
That's not my understanding. I would agree that if somebody's a citizen, they should not be removed from the rolls, Senator. Absolutely. You and I are in lockstep. I think that the counties, as part of the examination process, if they have a reason to believe that somebody needs to stay on the rolls, in statute, I don't know where that falls within the examination process, but I do know that they have the complete autonomy to keep somebody on the rolls if they have a reason to believe that they should stay on the rolls.
Okay. Let me ask you about the National Voter Registration Act. It says that it's to protect the integrity of the electoral process by ensuring the maintenance of an accurate and current voter registration roll, and that it must be done in a uniform, non-discriminatory, and in compliance with the Voting Rights Act. Help me understand, if your office is leaving this up to each county whether or not to take action in response to the advisory, how does that meet the qualification of being uniform under federal law?
We're following state law and federal law in this matching process, and the actual procedure, matching process, that I'm going to say list maintenance process, the actual procedure is laid out very specifically in state law, which is what we're following.
I'm asking about do you need to follow the National Voter Registration Act?
Yes, we do. Absolutely.
And that's what I'm asking. And if it requires uniformity, and you're leaving this up to the counties, the way you've described, how does that assure uniformity? And do you have an opinion about whether it complies with that law?
I want to be very careful, Senator,
Sure.
because I've been sued a few times in the last couple of weeks to not offer an opinion on any legal theories. But what I can tell you is that the uniformity required under the federal law is one that we have reached with our statewide database. And if the counties, if we continue to act as a conduit between the counties and us and DPS, I think that uniformity can absolutely be achieved, but it requires good communication and it requires accurate data.
Okay. Would you agree with me that newly naturalized citizens are in a unique position to maybe be included on this list, even when they still have the right to vote?
I want to make sure I understand your question.
Let me ask it a different way. I'll ask it just straight up. Did y'all do any sort of analysis in the Secretary of State's office to determine whether the program that you're engaging in might have a discriminatory effect on any one group, such as those who are newly naturalized, because they might be first shown as not being a citizen, but later became a citizen?
It's my understanding, Senator, that the data fields that we used for this process and are continuing to use are ones to make matches with our database, so that the criteria I gave you before, and data that indicates whether or not somebody is a citizen in DPS's database. And so if we don't have naturalized data on who and who is not a naturalized citizen at our fingertips, which we don't, but the counties do, that's another reason why we need to act as a conduit and be the go-between with the counties to ensure this is as accurate as possible.
Was any analysis done by the Secretary of State's office to determine whether this program might have a discriminatory impact?
I have to check with our lawyers. I know that I am confident that our office is operating within every state and federal law and conducting this according to state and federal law.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator.
Thanks. Senator Salazar,
I do.
you're next.
Yeah. Mr. Secretary, when we talk about the list that is conveyed to you by DPS, it is for all practical purposes their filter for voter eligibility, correct?
I wouldn't characterize it as a filter that they put on for voter eligibility.
But it is a list that speaks to voter eligibility, correct?
I think that's correct. We're trying to determine who is and is not qualified to vote under the law.
Okay.
If they've got the best data on citizenship in the state, we're going to use that data.
Okay. So we take that list and look at the three criteria that you mentioned. There may be some subgroups and things like that for eligibility. How many of the names on that list had some, I guess, for lack of a better description, questionable eligibility based upon citizenship, not the commission of felony, or psychological reasons and things like that?
How many on the total list?
On the total list.
Each and every one is my understanding of
was
the data.
based on citizenship and not criminal convictions or mental health.
That's correct.
How many people on that list had voted previously?
On the initial set of data from DPS, when we compared it to the team database, when we had those three matching criteria I described, right, for the initial set of data of the 95,000, 58,000 had some sort of voting history in one election or another that we keep in the team database.
They had a voting history which implies citizenship, does it not?
I want to be careful about implying something from the data that our office has no role in, because we have no investigative authority, Senator.
When they went to the polls to vote, they did have to have identification and or a voter registration card, did they not?
There are any numbers of identification that you can provide, including reasonable impediment exceptions to providing photo ID.
Right.
But yes, Senator, in general, that's accurate.
In order to get that ID, be it a driver's license or a voter registration card, citizenship is implied in those cases, is it not?
I'm not sure how to appropriately answer that question. I think, IDs speak for themselves, and different IDs are acceptable at the polling place, including a citizenship card that has your photo. So certain IDs, I think, speak more to citizenship specifically than others, but implications I'm a little bit reticent to imply.
And I understand, but the question is this: if DPS has a list of people who were allowed to vote, how then do they get on a list of people who may not be allowed to vote, who have voted or are eligible to vote? How then do they get switched over to a list that draws into question that eligibility?
I want to make sure that I'm answering your question and I'm understanding it correctly.
And I'll try to ask it in a form that you're trying to answer too.
Well, I appreciate that, Senator. Are you asking how somebody gets into the DPS database to get an ID and is also in our team database?
Well, what I'm asking is if these people voted previously and they had sufficient documentation to be allowed to vote, whatever that documentation is, how do they all of a sudden get noted by DPS as some sort of questionable eligibility to vote, and thereby come on this list of 95,000 names to you?
I think that's a very technical question about the data that I'm not equipped to answer at this time. But it's a logical question that I think may be best asked to the custodian of DPS's data, DPS. But I'm not going to venture a guess as to the actual technical implications of how that works.
Okay. Could my name show up on that list? I had a voter registration card and a driver's license. Could my name get on that list?
I don't know, Senator.
Okay. Those are my questions. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I have Senator Colcorson and then Senator Alvarado, and then I believe Senator Miles in order.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. And we have a Harvey meeting, a work group from Senate Finance, and I'm going to have to step out, so I'll be real quick. Thank you, Senator Watson, for your questions. I know we're all trying to get to the same place. Certainly, this is a confirmation hearing for you, and this is something of note right now of the activities that your office do and whether you're capable of doing the duties of the state of Texas in this office. So I thank you for your service and for what you've been through, and I just want to follow up on something. When we look at House Bill 4034, and it gave you certain duties that you had to do, and this started in March of 2018, and you came in, was it December?
Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that there had been 10 trainings for counties, the registrars, is that right, or whoever that duty?
Yeah, voter registrars in different counties, it's different, but yes.
You're right. In our rural counties, it's a county clerk, and some other counties, it's other. Of those 10, you mentioned 200 counties had attended or participated.
Nearly 200, yes, Senator.
In those trainings, don't take 15 minutes to explain this. What did you tell them about this process that you were taking with these new duties of House Bill 4034 and the list maintenance and then the notifications that they may have to send out? What did that training?
It was important to conduct the training in a way that was familiar to the voter registrars. And so we used an already existing list maintenance process, which is the jury summons that we've discussed some today, that when when county clerks, you told me not to take 15 minutes, and I
No,
won't.
but keep going.
Promise.
I mean,
that when the county clerks send jury summons that somebody has been requested to serve on a jury, and they check no that they're a non-citizen, and that's affirmative. That is somebody affirmatively saying that they are not a citizen. That's a list maintenance activity that the counties currently perform in conjunction with our office. And that was the backdrop for the training on how to handle this specific list maintenance activity with the new DPS data. The data is treated almost identically in that you're not allowed to automatically cancel somebody from the voter rolls if you have a reason to believe that they should be removed. It requires that 30-day letter.
you have said that you don't keep citizenship in your office. Is that correct? If somebody becomes a naturalized citizen, then they they notify the county. Is that correct?
Some counties have that data because some county voter registrars either send people to naturalization ceremonies or they otherwise acquire it by doing this list maintenance activity, whether it's
So stay with me. How does that get back to DPS in the information that you were trying to acquire and create weak matches or strong matches?
I'm glad you asked. Those are two different sets of data on citizenship. DPS's data on citizenship, and I don't want to speak for them, but the data that we received from DPS on their best list of non-citizens was based off of somebody going into a DPS office and getting an ID and affirmatively saying that they are not a citizen by showing proof of lawful presence. That's totally and completely separate from the data that the counties have on citizenship. But that's another example of why it's important for us to be a conduit for this list activity.
So we have a lot of questions here about how this 95,000, and then and we don't know how many of those are citizens yet. Do we know that?
We don't know any sort of.
This was a process that we've gone through. You sent that out, and I understand what Senator Watson was asking. I think maybe there were some regrettable statements in your press release, and I would give you great caution as we all have the ability to put out press releases. Everyone with social media now is a reporter, right? And I would say that some of that maybe should be tempered. That it's a process, that we don't know how many of the 95,000 are here. And I would say a lot of focus has been given on who is a citizen and a non-citizen. I would challenge us in this room from many counties that I've worked with in the last, since the last election, that there was a deluge of voter registrations that came into their office that they almost could not process in time to get out to the cards. And there might be people that are citizens, but they weren't here long enough to be determined to actually live in the state, or we didn't know if they lived in the state. And there were a lot of different processes. And I want to work with your office on that, because your office received those voter registrations and then pushed them to the county. So my point being here is that there's a lot of interaction between you and those registrars in the county, correct?
Yes.
And so one of the things I have to ask you is this whole process that you've been through, would you recommend to us, and I know we're asking a lot of DPS questions, but is there a way that we could make this process better in those queries and how the database works?
I think that processes, Senator, can always be improved. And I think that any list maintenance activity that involves data, a data set that is this large, or any sort of an activity that involves this many records of data, that any process involving that data needs to be as good as humanly possible. Are there improvements to be made in this case? I think there are. and I'm committed to doing so, whether that's working with the counties, continuing to act as a conduit, or working with DPS. I think that that analyzing the data and coming up with ideas for processes, my office is 100% committed to serving as a resource if that's something that you're interested in exploring. But I'm not going to venture a guess as to specifically what processes would work better with regards to this matching process.
Those of us that have served on Senate Finance know that we have issues with how we operate our driver's license offices in general. This should come as no surprise to us that maybe we're having issues with the data. We've talked a lot in Senate Finance on contracts. I know that you've mentioned vendors. I think that it, as much a part of the examination we've given you today, we should also do that with these records and how they're kept and who the vendors are and how these queries work in trying to find these matches, because obviously voter integrity is very important to all of us. We want every citizen that wants to vote, who is legally in this state, to be able to vote, but we also don't want anyone that is not a citizen or not legally in this state to vote. So on your training, did you train the registrars on notices of examination? Did you train them to say, we're going to give you a set of names. You have information that we don't have. Did you train them on how to make sure that they then do a further query on the names given to them?
Yes, and when for some reason or another, after this list maintenance activity began, when counties were finding it difficult to perform that list maintenance activity and came to us with recurring questions on where do I find the data, what am I supposed to be doing, we provided some updated guidance to the counties in the form of an email which I provided to the committee, and one of those is checking with local immigration authorities or checking their data. For example, for offline counties, they may have fields of data that includes naturalization or other information about any one of these voters that would say, yes, they need to absolutely stay on the rolls, or we have reason to believe this person should not, and then that 30-day examination would begin.
So you cautioned the counties, the 200 that attended your trainings, 10 trainings, that there may be mistakes on the data that they were going to receive, the names that they were going to receive, and that there was a duty for them to also look very closely at that before they sent out notices of examination?
Yes.
And then one more question. If someone is removed from the rolls, and that's after they get the notice of examination and then also a second notice, and they are erroneously removed or removed at all, in the next election, are they allowed to cast a provisional ballot?
Yes, under state law, if someone in that specific example,
one of these 95,000, let's use that.
Let's use your example. Somebody appears at the polling place and says, I want to vote, and they're not on the list. You can vote provisionally, number one. Number two, if you don't want to vote provisionally, you can go to the county registrar that day, provide your proof of citizenship, and be added back to the rolls, to the voter rolls that day, and vote that day.
If someone cast a provisional ballot and they are legally in the state and are legal to vote, that provisional ballot, there's a number of, as prescribed by law, how that goes through. Are they then reinstated back to the voter rolls?
I think once proof of citizenship has been shown to the registrar, that, to rewind a little bit, if the voters
I'm at the
are
voter
removed,
polls and I don't have time to go down to the registrar, and I might be able to do that in Washington County, but I'm certainly not going to do that in Harris County, because I'm trying to vote and I'm busy and I've got a job. I cast my provisional ballot, and then it is proven through how they go through the provisional provisional ballots that I am a lawful citizen in the state of Texas, able to vote, am I added back to that voter roll?
According to state law, my interpretation of it would be that the county voter registrar then has a reason to believe that somebody needs to remain or indeed be added back to the rolls, and yes, they have the authority to do so.
And that has no function of your office. You are a conduit right now between looking at what DPS has, creating fields of matches, taking that, and I understand that the first attempt at this, and I'm not sure you were in office, was maybe many thousands more than 95,000. And then they went back and said something's wrong with this data, and y'all began to work through a series. We have some of those emails, but you went back to clarify, and that the 95,000 was, after an attempt from about April to December, the best that y'all could come up with to say these are matches that there seems to be something wrong with. They don't add up. Then that information goes to the counties, and the counties then were encouraged to look at those before they sent the notice of examination. Am I correct?
The counties are required to come to the determination that they have a reason to believe that somebody should be removed from the rolls before they are then even start that 30-day clock. Correct.
When there were errors found in the 95,000, has your office been proactive in helping counties work through this?
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Sarah Rada?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and appreciate you letting us all take our time and ask deliberative questions. Mr. Secretary, thank you. I do appreciate you coming to my office and answering some questions, but since then, I have more questions, and I'm trying to fill in some of the gaps. There's been 2 references made to House Bill 4034, but I want to clarify that House Bill 4034 specifically has to do with the duplicate registration and not DPS citizenship data, correct?
I would need to look at the bill. I'm sorry, Senator.
Okay, that's fine.
If any misstatements have been made about
No, it wasn't a misstatement. I'm just trying to distinguish that what we're dealing with here, what's been in the press for the last couple of weeks, it goes back to the passage of House Bill 2512. And that's the discussion that you and I had in my office, correct?
Yes, Senator.
Okay, so that bill was passed in 2013.
Correct.
And that was, and I'll state in here from the bill or the bill analysis, for the purpose of voter registration or the administration of elections. So that was passed, and there was a fiscal note, I think, for 2014 to the tune of a little over $2 million. I guess that was for the vendor, the IT company that was hired.
I'd have to go back and look at the fiscal note, but was it provided by the Secretary of State's office?
No, this was part of the bill analysis of House Bill 2512. And I bring that up because when I asked you in my office how this started, and this was what you pointed to, House Bill 2512. And I'm trying to fill in some of the missing parts here. If that was passed in 2013, and then you had this gap of time, and again, I know, as Senator Watson said, you can't be held responsible for what took place before your arrival as Secretary of State. But I'm just trying to figure out why none of this was done, this gathering of information, until 2018. Do you have any insight on that?
I do, Senator, and from what I've been briefed on in my time as Secretary of State, and have some anecdotal familiarity with it prior to that, it's my understanding that neither the DPS database nor the Secretary of State's team database, when this law was passed in 2013, neither of those databases were reliable as they are now in terms of matching functionality. And since then, those databases have been significantly improved. The vendor that I've mentioned that now handles the team database is PCC, and the team database has been operating very, very well for, I know my predecessor spoke about it 2 years ago, so for at least 2 years. It's been much more reliable. I'm not familiar with the specifics about when the DPS database was upgraded, but that is one of the reasons for the delay in the actual list maintenance process that's taking place.
And I want to make sure that people understand what TEAM is. TEAM is the name of the software. Is that right?
TEAM is the name of TEAM is an acronym that stands for Texas Election Administration Management, I believe. But that is the federally and state required statewide voter registration database.
Okay. So, was this company or the vendor under contract through DPS or through the Secretary of State's office?
The PCC vendor is on contract through the Secretary of State's office.
Okay. I just, if you have a contractor that you're paying, and this goes on for years where they can't seem to get this right, because that's what you said in my office and you just stated here, that they couldn't quite get the matching or something, that was some error in the database or the software. That this went on for so many years, and then voila, in March in 2018, around the time of the primaries, then this process is resolved, and now all of a sudden this work can be done.
I want to be careful not to speak for PCC, but I think that the overall assessment of how that database, how TEAM specifically is functioning now, is very positive. And I don't want to speak for the timing of when DPS's was upgraded so that it could be more reliable either.
Okay, I'd like for somebody, and again, I know you weren't there, but somebody that perhaps was in the administration at that time to provide a response about that. I find it hard to believe. I mean, if I hired somebody to do computer work, database work, and years are going by and they're not able to deliver, I would have gotten rid of them and hired somebody else. So, when these lists were released, you mentioned that that you warned or alerted the counties that there might be some inaccuracies. Is that right?
That was part of the training, is that we did not have a goal in terms of a number, and I've made that very clear in the time since the list maintenance activity began. Our goal is accuracy, and necessarily if the counties have data, which again that we don't, and they're using it to ensure that either somebody needs to stay on the rolls or somebody needs to be taken off, then that does affect the overall number.
So, it sounds like you did some due diligence. You had 10 trainings, over 200 counties were represented. But I'm concerned that there seems to have been a lack of due diligence before this list was released to the counties. Because the conclusion I draw is that either you or someone in your administration just didn't double check your work product, or intentionally allowed information that was inaccurate to go out. So help me understand what took place.
Happy to, and thank you for asking it. I think it's important to remember that the data was double-checked over the course of several months, which is what the emails that I provided to the committee show. And in terms of, I want to make sure I answer your entire question fully. You asked about double checking, and I'm not remembering what the second half of your question was, Senator. I'm sorry.
The conclusion I come to when a mistake of this magnitude is made, that either somebody did not check the work product, they didn't double check what they were releasing out into the masses, or intentionally allowed inaccurate information that wasn't fact-based released. So I'm just trying to figure out which one of those occurred.
Thank you. This is what we're trying to achieve. As accurate a voting list as possible. The due diligence to what you refer is done not only by our office, as is exhibited from the emails that I gave to the committee, but it's performed by the counties on a very large scale. Our office doesn't have any investigative authority. We don't have the information on these individual voters that the counties do. And that's why we continue and I continue to pledge myself to being a conduit of information between the counties, DPS, anybody that can get accurate information so that we can ensure our voter rolls are accurate.
The inaccuracy of this list that was put out has caused a lot of, quite a burden on our counties. I know in talking to my folks in Harris County, they were provided a list with 20,000 plus names, and they were able to determine there were a lot of duplications. And now that list is down, well, it was a couple of days ago, down to 11,000, and they feel that that list will shrink down even more. That's quite a gap from 29,000 to 11,000. And I think about the people that had to probably stop what they were doing, the normal duties of the county, and then get involved in this. And they're still working on that. So it's had quite a number of implications and consequences. And I want to know if you're concerned that releasing this list may have unintendedly targeted a group of voters, Latino voters.
Senator, I want to be very clear with you that no piece of data from DPS or our office that was transmitted to the counties included anything about race or ethnicity.
But we're talking about citizenship here is in question. And on that note, can you tell me about Code 64?
I'm vaguely familiar with the news reports on Code 64.
Okay. And that's used to determine citizenship. And I was wondering if that could have been used as a filter, because it also indicates when someone has gone to DPS to register to vote, in which they would have to prove citizenship. Was that included in this list?
We received some feedback from the counties, and I've since become anecdotally aware of other people's interpretation and characterization of what happened with the Code 64s. Senator, I'm sorry, I'm not a data person, so when we start talking about code and numbers, I don't have specific expertise in that, so I want to be very careful about characterizing this the right way. We had counties contact us, and after we transmitted the data, and the counties had some sort of data or information about their voters on their voter rolls that we did not. And if that information is something that DPS had, whether it's somebody who had come into DPS and gotten a driver's license and then been registered to vote, or otherwise, we were committed to ensuring, number one, that nobody was removed from the voter rolls that's qualified to vote, and number two, ensuring its accuracy. And we acted swiftly upon receiving feedback from the counties on the data that they were actually seeing on their end.
Okay. Madam Chair, I'll go back on the list. Thank you.
Senator Miles?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank you for recognizing how important this is to all Texans and allowing us the time to thoroughly go through these questions. My colleagues have done a great job, but at this point in time, I want to shift the conversation a little bit. Secretary Whitley, I want to shift the conversation to talk about if there were any outside influences that led up to this. So I've got a couple of questions I just want to ask you. And we've talked about this earlier in my office, and I just want my colleagues to understand and hear the answers to the questions. Secretary, did you know of anybody in your office that communicated with the Presidential Advisory Commission on Elections Integrity before it was disbanded?
I'm not familiar with any communication before I became Secretary of State with that commission. I don't remember when it was disbanded, but I do believe that took place before I became Secretary of State.
Okay, thank you. Did you or your office have any conversations with any agency member of the federal government about this investigation before the election advisory was issued?
No.
Who did the Secretary's office work with on the investigation, either in government or elsewhere? Who did y'all work with outside? Do you have any consultants or anything of that nature?
No, Senator, we don't, but I want to make sure it's clear from your question and in my answer that we do not perform an investigation. But in this list maintenance process, no, we did not consult with anybody.
You made that clear earlier, so I apologize to you. Did you or a member of your staff communicate with the governor's office about this list in the month before releasing the election advisory?
I know that I communicate with the governor's office all the time.
So was he aware? Was he made aware of this?
I used to work
the situation.
I think that we regularly update the governor's office on what's going on.
Was he made aware of this particular situation with these voters?
This list maintenance exercise,
yes,
was one that we knew in our office was going to commence when we received the data in January, and we did provide those sort of estimates to the governor's office.
So when a large number of voters came out that we're speaking of on today, was he made aware of it immediately?
Once we had the data back from our vendor and we were ready to end the trainings to the counties, we made sure the governor's office knew what we were announcing. Yes.
Was there any participation from the governor's office in shaping your media press release? Thank you, sir.
My office communicated with the governor's office about the press release, that it was going to go out. To my knowledge, there were no edits or any sort of...
So the governor's office approved the media release?
I wouldn't characterize it as approving, but the governor appointed me, and I wanted to make sure that he knew that we were going to be announcing it.
They were made aware of the media release and its contents before it went out?
Yes.
All right. Did you or a member of your staff communicate with the Texas Attorney General about this list in the month before it was released?
Once we had the list of matches, Senator, and from our vendor, as we indicated in the media advisory, we sent that data to the Attorney General's office in addition to the counties. So before we sent it, we wanted to make sure they knew what we were sending. So yes.
Did the Attorney General's office take part in helping you shape your press release at all?
To my knowledge, no. I do think that there were some public information implications in the actual election advisory that we wanted to make sure we were accurate on.
So you sought their help in the language of your press release?
Well, I think we wanted to accurately portray the nature of the information.
Accurately portray?
Yes.
Okay. And that's what you consider yourself doing when sitting down with the Attorney General's office?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Last question, Madam Chair. Did you have any conversations with any other senior state officials, senators, or election advisory about any election advisory issues?
I spoke with the members of this committee after it was issued, as I did with you. Before we sent the press release out, I made sure that the Speaker's staff and the Lieutenant Governor's staff knew that we would be releasing it.
Did any one of those help you shape that particular document?
No.
There was no consulting by any one of those?
No.
Madam Chair? Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Hall.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for this, because I think this is one of the most important nominations we'll have, and we got to make sure that we get it right. But we also have to recognize that the job of Secretary of State is much bigger than one little task, which we seem to have focused on. And if I understand what you said, Secretary, this is a process that roughly 10, 11 months in duration, and you were there just at the tail end of it as it was coming to an end. Everything had been put in place on processes, procedures, and rules, et cetera, that took place before you got there. Is that correct?
That's correct, but I want to make it clear to you and to the committee that if any of the processes based off of feedback that we've gotten from the counties, if those need to change, I'm absolutely committed to doing so.
And it's basically the first time this has been done.
Yes.
And like many things, until you've actually done something, it's hard to tell how well it's really. Only MacGyver gets it right every time. You know, so this process essentially had to take place to learn what we need to do to improve it. And I think you said we see opportunity or need for improvement. And in our focus of going forward, because there's nothing that can be done to fix things in the past that were done by others before you got there. But I think what you're saying is that you are focused on trying to have every system that has to do with our election process work so that we are assured of election security. Is that correct?
They need to work, and they need to be accurate. Yes, Senator.
Okay. And I appreciate the fact that this all where you were in this process. But along that line, I'd like to ask you some questions about some other areas which I think are important. And I'll make it real clear that I know what I want to ask you about. You have had nothing to do with what took place in the past. But what we've seen, we're very concerned about going forward, that we don't repeat some of these practices that have taken place. And I know it's questionable about the level of authority that the Secretary of State's office has with regard to issuing waivers, but without regard to whether the authority is there or not, I think one of the sayings is just because you have the right to do something doesn't mean it's necessarily going to be the right thing to do. And one of them in particular is making sure that the votes in the voting machines are accurate. And one of the safeguards that was put in place to do that was to require zero tapes to be printed before the election took place, immediately before the election took place, to make sure that there were no preloaded votes and we get an inaccurate answer when the machine is tallied up at the end. And it's my understanding that waivers have been issued numerous times for the convenience of the election office to waive those zero tapes. So my question is, can we count on you to stick to the rules and regulations that are put in place to ensure that we have election security, and that we will have 0 tapes printed.
I'm committed to working with you, Senator, and anybody else in the legislature on their priorities as it relates to elections in the state. You and I spoke about this in your office when we visited, and I pledged my office then to you as a resource, and I continue to do so. Any specific proposal about what's required, I would need to make sure that we appropriately dedicate the right amount of resources to. But I pledge my office as a resource to you, Senator.
Well, that, as I understand it, that is a requirement today that is being regularly waived, and it wouldn't be anything new. It would be just sticking to enforcing the rules and regulations as we currently have them, and that would include at the tail end. It's very important to have the tallies tapes run once the polls are closed, to know exactly what the votes were in that machine before it wanders around through the county heading over to the central counting section. Yet those tapes have been waived also, and I would include that to make sure that going forward that we make sure that our machines are 0 when we start, and we know what are in the machines as soon as the polls close.
Understood.
And let's see. Also, in this age of high-tech internet and the ability to manipulate software, we've recognized for a long time that any computer that has access to the internet should not be connected to any of the voting machines. Yet we've had waivers from the Secretary's office in the past allowing computers run by vendors to be hooked up to machines during the election process with no accountability on what was being done. And that would be another major area that I would hope that we would go back to sticking to the rules and regulations to preserve and protect the integrity of the voting process. And one other, and I'll stop with this, but there are more. We seem to waive the requirement, which I believe is a constitutional requirement, that our ballots be numbered, and that has been waived. So I would hope that we would go back to the process of numbering our ballots so that we can have a higher level of election security.
Understood, Senator.
Okay. But I thank you very much for taking on this job. I think it's an important one. I've listened to your answers that you've given to the questions, and I have a great deal of respect for your integrity. And I think that possibly if you had been there earlier in this process, we probably would have seen it done a little bit differently, because I think you're headed in the right direction, understanding how important our election process is, and that we do everything that everyone who can legally vote does so, or has the opportunity to do so. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, no demonstrations, guys. Thank you. Members, does that conclude all member questions of the committee? We welcome Senator West. By the rules, and Senator Menendez, glad you're back. By the rules the committee passed today, visiting senators are invited to ask questions if you like at the conclusion of the questions of the members. So it looks like we're at that point. You're limited to 5 minutes of questions. The way that we will do that is we'll time you while you're asking your question, so the answer doesn't cut into your question.
Thank you, Madam
asking time. Did one of y'all want to ask questions at this point?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Menendez?
I appreciate that very much. Secretary Whitley, I've been here since you started this morning. I had to briefly step out. Earlier, you mentioned that you held 10 trainings, correct?
Yes, Senator.
And at these 10 trainings, you had approximately 200 counties come in to receive training, correct?
Yes.
Then the question that I have, did the issue of people who had naturalized between receiving a license, did that never come up during the training?
I'm not familiar with whether or not it came up. I think that every possibility, there's no way that every possibility could have been discussed.
But earlier you mentioned that you did talk, or the counties, it was brought up that many have you mentioned Harris County specifically. You said they have the naturalization data. Therefore, they have a better way to verify who should and shouldn't be on there. Didn't you say that earlier?
Yes.
Okay, so then if you were aware that Harris County, it kind of surprises me that you're not aware whether or not the issue of naturalized citizens ever came up during the training, because you mentioned earlier that the last training occurred right before you released your press statement. Did you not say that?
Correct.
So was it a day before, a week before? When did you finish the training with the counties and then you issued the press release?
If I recall correctly, Senator, we finished the training for the counties on a Thursday, and then the very next day we got the data to them.
So what I don't understand is, if you had a list of 98,000 supposed or identified by DPS, in your press statement it says 95,000 is identified by DPS as non-U.S. citizens. Why didn't you ask the counties to help you vet the data, knowing that Harris County has naturalized citizen data? I mean, wouldn't that have dropped that number?
I believe, Senator, that is exactly what's going on right now.
Correct.
This list maintenance process is meant to look at this data to ensure that the voter rolls are as accurate as possible. And some of this data the counties have that we don't. And that's the process, working and going through the exact iterations that we're discussing and that we discussed in your office.
I agree. And the thing that I'm frustrated with is that I don't understand why you didn't have the counties vet the data. And I'll give you an example. Earlier in the questioning, Senator Watson asked, do you know how many people? And we did a little research, and to me, my research shows that Harris County has reported that 20,000 people show up as eligible to vote. So if we just take just Harris County, it was reported in the Chronicle, that would take the number down to 75,000. Is that not correct? Simple math.
That is 95,000 minus 20,000 is 75,000. Yes, Senator.
So my thought is, if that's Harris County, and then if you had checked with Dallas County and Tarrant County and Bexar County and just gone down the list, maybe this number would be down to 5,000 or 10,000. We don't know what it would be. What do we?
We do not know yet. The counties are still in the process of going through the activity.
So the question is, why put this press statement out that, as we discussed yesterday, as you mentioned, that in your press statement it says here, upon receipt of this information, your office immediately provided the data to the AG's office because you don't have statutory enforcement authority to investigate. But then, as we mentioned yesterday, you could have put a period there, but it goes on to say, or prosecute alleged illegal activity in connection with an election. By adding that statement, it infers that there was some alleged illegal activity. And so I think you have a cooling effect on people who are allowed to vote. So my question is, when Senator Sulliger asked you a question, he asked you about whether or not his name could come up on the DPS list, right? Remember we talked about, and you said, quote, DPS has the best data in the state. But if they don't have the naturalization data, maybe it's not the best data in the state. Maybe their data has to be checked, because someone who's been naturalized doesn't have to go back to DPS and say, hey, guess what? I went from being a legal permanent resident to now being a naturalized citizen. Is that correct?
I want to make sure I'm understanding your
So let me rephrase the question. My parents, my mother was a legal permanent resident for years and years and years, had her driver's license, paid her auto insurance, did everything she was supposed to legal, and then she became a naturalized citizen. If going to get a license takes 4 or 5 hours, and she's working and taking kids and picking up kids, and her license is perfectly good for 5 years, and in year 1 of having that driver's license, she becomes naturalized, she does not have an obligation to go back to DPS and tell them, I got naturalized, can you update my figures? Does she?
That is my understanding, correct.
Okay. So in your press release, my concern is how your press release, the things that it says, because in the last paragraph where you talk about if a registered voter is identified as a non-U.S. citizen and he or she should receive a notice examination, you talk about the documents they have to provide. A certified copy of a voter's birth certificate. I don't know if I have a certified copy of my birth certificate. I know I can get one. Is that my time?
Just please summarize your question.
Okay, last question. Yeah, I'll summarize this question. You go on to say, if you fail to respond within 30 days, then the voter registration will be canceled by the county voter registrar, period. You don't say today you've gone on to say many things about how you can cure that, or you're going to be on a list, but in your press statement it just says you are to be canceled by the voter registrar. You didn't say maybe canceled. You are canceled. So my concern is that yesterday we talked about this, and you told me that you had shared your press statement with the AG's office and the governor's office, correct?
Correct.
Have you shared any other press releases with those two offices?
My job is not to share press releases, but
So the answer
regular
is no?
regular coordination with state leadership is something that my office is proud to engage in.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator.
Madam Chair, I don't have a lot of questions. Secretary Whitley, you're familiar with the concept of, and I have not been in there, so if this is repetitive, please let me know. You're familiar with the concept of voter suppression?
Anecdotally, I've heard voter suppression talked about.
Do you believe that your press release had any impact on those that believe that your office engaged in voter suppression or any other offices engaged in voter suppression? Let me ask a question. Do you believe that by the wording of your press statement that it could intimidate people not to vote?
I have understood, Senator, that has been said about the press release, and I think that, looking back, that if there's anything that I could change about how this process has worked, that I would include more substantive data and information from our actual election advisory that provides for the actual process that the counties are going to follow in the actual press release, as opposed to just including it in the advisory, because I think a lot of misconceptions could have been cleared up on the front end if they were in the actual press release and not simply the advisory. But to me, I think that ensuring accurate voter rolls actually encourages participation.
Okay, that's fine, because I don't want to take up a bunch of time with the committee. So you were not sensitive to those issues when you released that press release, is that correct?
As Texas chief election official, I'm sensitive to all voter issues, and I've heard anecdotally all sorts of issues.
So what did you do
discussed.
in order to make certain that the framing of your press release expressed that sensitivity?
We ensured that we were following all state and federal laws at all times during the process.
As it relates to the sanctions that a person could encounter, do you think that was sensitive also?
I want to make sure I'm understanding your word sanctions.
Well, like we talked about DPS and persons, voters' rights being canceled, or that language. I'm paraphrasing it right now.
Sure. And I'll just, your question is about
what if a person was not legally entitled to vote and was on the roll. It's my understanding that your press statement addressed that issue. Did it not?
Is your question that if a person is not legally entitled to vote, that the press release addressed that?
Yeah, the press release.
Well, I know certainly the election advisory that was linked to in the press release went through the entire process that the counties would be following, and that includes both ensuring that people who are qualified to vote stay on the rolls.
Okay. And so it's your testimony that you took into consideration voter suppression issues when you drafted this particular press release.
Senator, I'm going to be careful to not to not mischaracterize the words that you're using.
Let me ask you this. How do you define voter suppression?
I've heard the term voter suppression used.
How do you define it?
I think it's irrelevant how
I
would define it.
Well, you're the Secretary of State, sir, and it's relevant to me if I'm going to vote for your confirmation. How do you define voter suppression? Easy question.
I think it's relevant to accurately define any term that pertains to elections, and I've heard voter suppression.
Are you trying to search for how you would define it right now? And if you are, just tell me that, and we can move on.
Senator, I think that what we are doing with the counties is ensuring that voter suppression does not take place.
Okay, so how do you define it?
So I've heard voter suppression used anecdotally as being discouraged from voting.
Do you believe that what you put out would discourage persons from voting?
No.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. I see Senator Watson.
If you don't mind, I have a quick follow-up. Sure. Based on what we've talked about and what I've heard, well, based upon what we think we know, which is that you have described what this is an attempt from your perspective to have done, is work cooperatively with the counties and not be an effort at suppression or anything of that nature, or to unnecessarily remove somebody from the voting rolls. We've also heard you describe what happens if you get removed from the voting rolls, even though you shouldn't have been. And while there may be cures to that, it requires that person to have to do things they shouldn't have to do if they were a citizen legally registered to vote. And we know that there was a referral to the Office of the Attorney General for investigation. With that being said, and we also know that there were a number of people where we've at least read, and I think you're even willing to agree that there may be some people in that 95,000 that aren't supposed to be, and you've communicated that to the counties. With all that being said, until the process with the counties is complete, so that this, what you call a maintenance activity, is complete, are you willing, as the Secretary of State, to tell the counties not to issue any notice of examinations so that people are not unnecessarily removed from the rolls when they might be, and ask the Office of the Attorney General to not engage in any criminal investigations or prosecutions until that process is complete?
Make sure I understand your question, Senator. Are you asking whether or not at this point in time that we ask counties, irrespective as to where they are in the list matching process, to not send out any 30-day notice of examination letters going forward?
Yes, until they have been able to complete, and you have been able to complete with them, as you indicate you're doing, so that we don't have anyone taken off the rolls that shouldn't be taken off the rolls, simply for not responding, even if there's mechanisms for curing that.
One thing I want to be clear with you on is that I've learned a lot over the last 2 weeks, and I don't want to commit to such a wide sweeping action without first consulting with the counties. I don't think it makes sense to do so. We would want to make sure we understand exactly where they are and whether or not they believe it's feasible to do so based off of where they are in the examination. I think, Senator, we've proven a willingness in the Secretary of State's office to tell the counties to change their process as a part of this examination, as was exhibited by what happened shortly thereafter when they received the data. We actually, when we had information that some people might be citizens, we instructed the counties to handle those appropriately. So if you're asking for for whether or not it might make sense for me to do so based off of trying to come up with the complete set of data from DPS or us or anybody. I would acknowledge that it very well might make sense, but I can't commit to you today that we would issue such a wide sweeping piece of information or recommendation to the counties without first consulting the counties.
With regard to your referral of these names to the Office of the Attorney General, your immediate referral for purposes of allowing criminal investigation or prosecution, would you be willing to ask the Office of the Attorney General to not engage any such activity until such time as this maintenance, the so-called maintenance operation, is complete?
I think that's a reasonable request. I'm not sure that it's appropriate coming from my office because I don't have any investigative authority.
You were the one that made the referral.
I understand, Senator.
And blasted it all over the state.
And I think now that I know kind of what your wishes are, I think that's something that I'm absolutely willing to discuss. Again, I've learned a lot over the last 2 weeks, and I wouldn't want to make a wide-ranging something that had that big of an implication, communication to the AG's office without first consulting and seeing where they are in the process. But it sounds reasonable to me, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Watson. Senator Miles, did you have your light on? Welcome, Dean of the Senate. Would you like to be recognized for questions at this time?
Just briefly, I was in between meetings and I wanted to show up to express my concerns. I had a good meeting yesterday, a transparent meeting with the Secretary, and it always helps to have a face for the issue. And yesterday I was already concerned about our constituents across the state, but then I learned that I have an intern who got the notification, and she participated in the meeting. So when you see how shocked and alarmed and facing the red tape and difficulty of proving that you are a lawful voter, it's shocking. And so that's why I know we will all take this very serious, and the Secretary expressed his concerns with the young person in my office. But you know, we read about it, we want to do the best we can to represent our constituents, and then when you have an intern bring you the papers, it's shocking. And I'm glad you're holding this very transparent meeting, and any documents that you request from the Secretary, I hope they'll be very quickly furnished. Thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing me to express my concern.
Thank you, Senator Whitmire. Members, any other questions? All right, Secretary Whitley, thank you so very much.
Thank you, Madam
Appreciate
Chair.
your time and your service to the state. At this time, we'll begin public testimony. I will remind everyone you'll have 2 minutes to speak. When the green light is pretty much when you're starting, the yellow light is your halfway mark, and at the red light comes on and the buzzer starts to beep, I'll ask you to conclude your statements. I'll also remind folks that public outbursts will not be tolerated, so everyone please stay polite and respectful. And if you're submitting written testimony, please submit 10 copies with your name on it to our committee clerk. Copies will be distributed to committee members and will be part of our public record. And members, just as a rough head count, we have about 24 people signed up to offer public testimony. So at this time, I would like to call Nina Perales, David Stout, James Keller, and Michael Siegel. And if I mispronounce your name, I apologize ahead of time. All right, Ms. Perales, did you want to start when you're ready?
Thank you, Chairwoman Buckingham and members of the committee. My name is Nina Perales. I'm the Vice President of Litigation for MALDEF and lead counsel in one of the lawsuits brought challenging Secretary Whitley's voter purge. In the last week of January 2019, Secretary Whitley launched a statewide voter purge by sending the names of approximately 98,000 voters to Texas counties, claiming the counties now had, quote, actionable information, unquote, about non-U.S. citizen voters and could send challenge letters. A number of counties responded immediately by sending challenge letters to the voters on their lists. Secretary Whitley's claim about suspected non-U.S. citizen voters was amplified by the Texas Attorney General, Governor Abbott, and our President himself. However, less than one business day after making his announcement, Secretary Whitley's staff quietly began to contact counties and inform them that the suspect voter list contained thousands of U.S. citizens who should not be removed from the rolls. The voter purge has turned into a debacle played out on the national stage. My testimony is summed up in 3 points. First, Secretary Whitley knew or should have known that his suspect voter list contained tens of thousands of naturalized U.S. citizens and should never have been released to counties. Second, Secretary Whitley has refused to publicly admit mistakes on the list or, most importantly, withdraw the list. Finally, the purge continues. County voter registrars have not recalled their challenge letters because of Secretary Whitley's actions, and U.S. citizen voters are confused and deterred from voting because they have received these letters. This is about Secretary Whitley, not about blaming counties, and not about blaming a vendor, not about blaming DPS.
Thank you, Ms. Perales. And members, we'll let everyone testify, and then we'll do questions of the whole panel. Mr. Siegel?
Thank you, Madam Chair, Committee. Mike Siegel is testifying in opposition to the appointment or the confirmation of David Whitley, who has, before he was even confirmed, jeopardized the right to vote of nearly 100,000 Texans. And for a guy who's essentially on probation, doesn't even have his job, this is a monstrous mistake. In essence, Whitley has shot first and asked questions later, and that should disqualify him from the position. I ran for the United States Congress in the Texas 10th Congressional District in 2018, and in the 9 counties in that district, at least 3 county elections officials took immediate action relying on Whitley's guidance. In Fayette County, in Washington County, and in Austin County, hundreds of letters went out to United States citizens telling them if they do not immediately respond within 30 days, they will be stricken from the voter rolls. I have copies of the letter sent out in Austin County. I can offer them to the clerk for the committee. But this is not just a minor inconvenience, thank you, sir, for an American citizen to have essentially a lien placed on their voter franchise, an unjustified encumbrance, forcing American citizens to take action without any wrongdoing to reassert their right to vote. And this is also misconduct that's compounded by who's affected. In Austin County, these letters were sent out predominantly, if not entirely, to Mexican American and Latin American United States citizens who already have to face abuse, suspicion, and harassment by local officials. So it's no easy matter for them to get a letter from the county clerk basically telling them if you want to vote, you have to come in and prove yourself. Regardless of Mr. Whitley's intent, and I do believe he thinks he acted in good faith, this is reckless disregard for the most important right in a democracy, the right to vote. And I think this misconduct should disqualify him from becoming Secretary of State. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Mr. Keller?
Hi, I'm Jim Keller. Thank you, Madam Chair, and the nominating committee for your attention today. I've served as a central count observer in Hays County elections several times, and I support the nomination of Mr. Whitley contingent on the following. I asked Mr. Whitley to look beyond voter fraud, which we've heard much about lately, and examine counting fraud and ballot chain of custody fraud, which we've heard very little about from the Office of the Secretary of State. Well, I'm certainly all for stopping all of the illegals or non-qualified people from voting. This really constitutes something like 0.5% of the, for instance, the 2016 general election. I think it was something like 9 million people voted. Contrast voter fraud with the counting fraud and ballot chain of custody fraud, where a bad actor exploiting any of the many vulnerable points due to election procedural lapses that are allowed by the Office of the Secretary of State and are commonplace in Texas and can lead to results counterfeited to produce decisive corruption of the results, and do so right under the noses of those supervising and carrying out the elections, essentially aided by the Secretary of State, exempting counties from following election code. It is time for the Secretary of State to follow election law in letter and in spirit. Texas deserves this, and we are wiser and watching with great interest now. I'd like to talk for a moment about regarding the zero tapes, which Senator Hall referred to earlier. It is important that this committee and voters understand technically what it means. The zero tape verifies that there are no counterfeit ballots already in the ballot box. I'm talking about the electronic ballot box before the election has even begun. And to say that we don't know if we have the resources, well, you know, we have the resources to do that one, because that one is extremely important. And the only thing that gives this electronic voting system credibility is these rules. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Mr. Stout.
Good morning. My name is David Stout. I'm a county commissioner in El Paso County, and thank you very much for hearing my testimony this morning. I'm here to share with you our county's experience with the Secretary of State's recent request to purge certain names from the voter rolls and ask you to vote against this confirmation. On January 25th, our County Elections Administrator, Lisa Wise, received an advisory from the Office of Secretary of State letting her know that she would be receiving the letter that we're discussing today. That list was sent to Ms. Wise on Sunday, January 27th, and it contained more than 4,000 names. The following Tuesday, we received a further correspondence from Mr. Whitley's office with a list of names that was on the original list and which the Secretary of State was requesting we remove. Obviously, a huge mistake had been made, and the original list had not been completely vetted. There were close to 1,000 names that on that list. Of course, this caused some major confusion, but thankfully our elections administrator thought twice before immediately sending the letters that the SOS requested be sent, requiring people to prove their eligibility to vote. She and her staff began to go through the list name by name and make sure there were no further mistakes, and I'm glad that they did that, because to date they have found close to another 1,000 names that should not have been on the original list. And ironically, she found one of her own employees who recently had become a naturalized citizen was on that list. If we would have blindly followed Mr. Whitley's instructions, we would have begun the process to possibly disenfranchise at least 2,000 voters in our community, and I would venture to say thousands more. We also would have created a liability for the county, as we could have been sued by every individual that we might have disenfranchised. This has caused a huge trust issue for El Paso County with the Secretary of State's office, and it's also causing a huge trust issue with voters. We already have problems with voter turnout, and this will only exacerbate those problems. There's also a monetary impact to our county because of this issue. Our county administrator had to keep a number of temporary personnel on payroll to continue going through the list, and she expects it could take 2 more weeks to finish.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you.
Can I just make one more last comment? Take 2 seconds. I want to make my point. I know it's a very difficult task going through this nominating process, and you all have much to consider, but I ask that you take my testimony into consideration, as well as the hugely irresponsible manner in which Mr. Whitley has acted during his first few months on the job. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, questions? Senator Seliger?
Ms. Prowse, is it your impression or assertion that the communication between the Secretary of State's office was advisory, and that here is this list of people who may not be eligible to vote, or was it more instructive? This is a list of people who should be stricken from the rolls.
The advisory was both informative and instructive. The advisory itself says we're providing actionable information. This is information upon which you should act. This is what a voter challenge letter looks like. Here is the link to that letter. If you believe or have reason to believe that these folks who we've identified as non-citizens could be non-citizens, then you should send the challenge letter. That's why so many counties, Austin, Fayette, Washington, Blanco, also Galveston County, have sent out these letters immediately upon receiving the advisory. I don't think it's right to blame the county elections administrators for responding in the way that they did to the instructions in the advisory.
And so some of these counties immediately sent out the letters before doing what El Paso County did, and then vetting the information they had and finding clearly that some people were exempt from the action that the letters talked about.
That is correct, Senator. The letters are still out there. They're sitting on people's kitchen counters and kitchen tables. U.S. citizens are this very day facing a ticking clock of less than 30 days at this point, 3 weeks, if they've even opened their mail or understood the import of the letter, that their voter registrations will be canceled.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Watson?
I want to follow up on that line of questioning. What Senator Seliger is pointing out is that some counties have approached this in different ways, but that can be a result of resources. That can be a result of how quickly they just want to act on something and get that behind them because it's not something they do every day. Do you agree with that?
Yes, because some counties have seen these enormous numbers being sent to them, huge purge lists, and stopped and used a modicum of common sense. The advisory itself says that the data that was being compared to DPS was old data, that simply what they were getting was lists of people who immigrated to the U.S. prior to having registered to vote. And there were counties that said, you know what, as a matter of common sense, we need to take a second look at this. Other counties just very reflexively obeyed the instructions in the advisory.
And I asked some questions earlier about the National Voter Registration Act and the fact that it requires uniformity. Do you have any thoughts about whether or not different counties reacting differently, and I'm not suggesting any are doing it right, wrong, or otherwise, but different counties acting differently would result in a lack of uniformity under that act?
Yes, Senator, there are two types of uniformity problems that violate the NVRA in what's going on right now. The first is that county by county, they're responding differently to the information. And even beyond that, some counties are going to have naturalization ceremony information, others will not. This is bad data and a waste of time. The other problem of non-uniformity is that the list was designed specifically to capture voters who are naturalized citizens who immigrated to the U.S. And by targeting only that group of voters through the way the protocol was designed, there is a lack of uniformity as well in checking eligibility.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Other questions, members, for the panel? I have a hard time seeing your lights, so if I don't want to miss anyone. Commissioner Stout, did your county participate in the training that the Secretary of State's office offered?
I believe so. There was a training that Lisa Weiss participated in January, but she said that there was not any information given or instruction given on how to deal with naturalized people going through the naturalization process. It was just an overview on maintenance.
Thank you. Any further questions, members, for this panel? All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Next up, Anthony Gutierrez, Cynthia Weatherby, Nina Brodsky, and Laura Presley. Mr. Gutierrez, you want to start?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, Senators. My name is Anthony Gutierrez. I'm the Executive Director of Common Cause Texas, testifying on behalf of Common Cause in opposition to Secretary Whitley's nomination. Common Cause is a national organization or a nonpartisan group that works on democracy reform issues. In Texas, it's principally voting rights and elections work. And we've been paying very close attention to this, the list maintenance thing that Secretary Whitley describes. I paid very close attention to your questions this morning, and I feel like I got a lot of new details to some of our serious questions, but not a lot of satisfactory answers. I did submit written testimony, and I hope you'll review it. I'll just really quickly run through some of the big questions that I think we still have that are not answered. I don't understand why that list was referred to the Attorney General. This big list that the Secretary had no reason to believe anyone on that list had actually committed a crime. Why was that given to the Attorney General? I thought Senator Watson's suggestion about just referring them, suggesting that they should just not be prosecuting anybody or pursuing any kind of criminal investigation was a good one, which should not even be necessary, but I feel like that should have been something that he should have jumped at instead of saying it's something like, we'll think about. The 10 trainees that were described, I still don't quite understand what happened there, because the county officials, I think we all saw media reports where county officials were describing just not really understanding what they were supposed to do or the data they were looking at. They clearly were not brought in on the front end to be consulted on the data or the methodology. That seems like a bit of due diligence that should have been obvious, that these people work with voter rolls every day. They could have pointed out some of these red flags early on in the process and avoided the debacle that happened afterwards. And the decision not to rescind the advisory once it was discovered that it was so wildly inaccurate. I don't understand why there was this insistence that we just had to stick with this advisory. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your testimony. Ms. Weatherby?
Thank you, Chair Buckingham and members of the committee. We appreciate the opportunity to talk today. I am Cynthia Weatherby, testifying as a member and on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Texas, and I'm speaking on Mr. Whitley's confirmation. It's really unusual for us to get involved in any political appointments. In the Capitol, we concentrate our legislation efforts on those pertaining to the democratic process. And while we cover a range of topics, our mission of empowering voters and defending democracy overrides all the other issues that we discuss. We appreciate the opportunity to talk today. I am Cynthia Weatherby. Desire the right, the knowledge, and the confidence to participate in the democratic process. And we were very saddened that the interim Secretary of State chose to participate in actions that pose a risk of undoing our work, particularly registering newly naturalized citizens. And our members register tens of thousands of those each year. And the League celebrates those new citizens' participation in the voting process. So we've also worked very hard to establish a positive relationship with the Secretary of State's office, and we learn from them by participating in their annual 3-day election official training. We work with them to offer clear and factual information to voters throughout the state. As an example, we survey all county websites to be certain that those websites include the office's updated information. And the League also appreciates the staff's leadership in election process security. We want to see an improved and modernized voter registration and elections process that is more accurate and secure. And it seems evident that that should be a priority this session. Our faith in accomplishing that under Mr. Whitley's leadership is diminished.
Thank you for your testimony. Ms. Brodsky?
Yeah, hi. My name is Nina Brodsky, and I want to thank you for letting me speak. I'm opposed to the nomination of David Whitley for...
Okay, hi everybody, this is Bobby Blanchard. I am the Texas Tribune social media editor. I wanted to let you know that we're going to be ending this live stream on Facebook. We are still streaming on YouTube and Twitter, and there's a link to our YouTube stream in the comments. You can go there if you want to keep watching the stream on YouTube, but we're going to end the stream on Facebook. Thank you for watching. If you want to see more coverage, follow Alexa Ura. Subscribe to our newsletters. They're almost all free except for the Blast. You can get the Brief for free every day. It's a great newsletter product. And if this was helpful to you, if having this stream here was useful to you in any way, we would love it if you become a member of our nonprofit newsletter today. You can contribute any dollar amount. There's a link in the comments that I'll pin to the top of this comment thread. Your contributions help us do this journalism. Our journalism is free to consume. It is not free for us to do, so anything you can do to help us is greatly appreciated. But we're about to end this feed, but you keep watching on YouTube. But thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for following along, and you have a great day. Bye-bye, guys. But we're about to end this feed, but you keep watching on YouTube. But thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you.
That Senator Hall mentioned, Texans are demanding that the Secretary of State end these waivers. We believe the new Secretary will take immediate action to end the practice of issuing county-by-county workarounds, waivers that suspend Texas laws. The current practice of waiving these laws violates the Texas Constitution, Article 1, Section 28. No power of suspending laws in this state shall be exercised except by you guys, the legislature. As we sit here today, waivers are given to several vote counting laws around the state, and I'm going to give you some examples. I'm going to reiterate what Senator Hall said. Zero tapes and results tapes are not printed in Travis and Lubbock counties, but they're printed in Midland and Rockwall counties. Where's the consistency there? Number two, some counties number their ballots. Bell County, who has paper ballots, sequentially number their ballots consistent with the Texas Constitution. Harris County, who has electronic ballots, last time I checked, computers are real good at numbering stuff. They should be able to number their ballots, and the equipment can do it. They're just not doing it. Where's the consistency? We believe that the Secretary Whitley will clean up the SOS office and enact these reforms, and Texans will trust their elections and their votes are being counted. And we encourage and support Mr. Whitley addressing these waivers and cleaning up the office. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, questions? All right, seeing none, thank you all so very much.
Thank you.
Our next panel, Whitney Peak, Cornelia Foster, Steve Chamberlain, Hilda Guillen Gomez, Ms. Peak.
Yes, thank you, Chair Buckingham and members of the Nominations Committee. My name is Whitney Peak, and I live in Austin, Texas. And I am here as a voter, as a citizen, as a lifelong Texan, to testify against the nomination of David Whitley as Texas Secretary of State. I am very disturbed by Secretary Whitley's advisory report questioning the citizenship status of approximately 100,000 people on our voter rolls. And I don't want to go through the details of the report again, but I agree with the concerns expressed by Nina Perales and Mike Siegel. Since this report targeted many people who are and went on to become U.S. citizens, I couldn't help but think of my role as a volunteer deputy voter registrar for Travis County. It's been a great honor for me to register new citizens to vote, and I remember several of them filling out the forms, always very carefully, smiling big and shaking my hand when it was complete, and sometimes even tears were shed. The sense of pride in the eyes of someone excited for their first election is not one that I will soon forget. They say that you can't choose family, but these targeted people are people who chose the sometimes difficult path of becoming American citizens. So in many ways, they are the best sort of family. They chose Texas as their home. The actions of Secretary Whitley did not just create a bureaucratic nightmare for the counties, but he also punished this hopeful group and replaced that with fear. Because there is a fear associated with getting a notice letter, and it discourages voting, for fear of wrongdoing and for fear of breaking the law, and that is voter suppression, and the damage has been done. So I just wonder, what was this? Was it a display of lack of judgment by Secretary Whitley, or was this a purposeful weaponization of voter data? I'm not sure, but either way, I feel that these actions undermine the integrity of our elections and are disqualifying to serve in the role of Texas Secretary of State, and I urge you all to vote no on his nomination today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Ms. Foster?
Hi. I'm
Cornelia Adams Foster. Like Dr. Presley, I'm a precinct chair in Travis County. I'm concerned about election integrity issues. I'm also somewhat concerned that the controversy over the press release is going to overshadow some of the issues I really care about, which have to do with the electronic tabulation and some of the issues that Senator Hall raised and some other people have spoken to, because we have a situation with electronic voting where waivers can be given by the Secretary of State's office, and then there's no forensic audit trail so that anybody could look back if there were any irregularities, and this is a problem with electronic voting. Also, there are situations where tabulation computer machines end up being connected to the internet, and that too is a way for mischief to occur. And so I'm speaking in support of David Whitley, because my hope is that there will be real attention given to following Texas state laws on election integrity that address these issues with electronic voting, and we just need for there not to be waivers going forward. So that's
Thank you for your testimony. Thank you. Mr. Chamberlain?
Good morning, Madam Chair and Senators. My name is Steve Chamberlain. I'm here to speak in opposition of the confirmation of Secretary Whitley. Recently, bogus information was released was released by the Secretary of State for approximately 100,000 non-citizen voters. To me, this was voter intimidation because of the way it was done, and without having any information on it, or without checking the information. You guys are not intimidated, but as a VDR in Bastrop County, I have spoken with a lot of people that even refuse to register to vote because they are intimidated by the government. As Senator Alvarado said earlier, this was either voter intimidation or gross negligence. I don't know which it is, but whichever, that is not something that should be done by the Secretary of State. And when we lose the right to vote, then we've lost democracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony. Ms. Guillen-Gomez?
Yes, thank you, Senator. My name is Hilda Guillen-Gomez. I do live in Austin County. I was appointed Justice of the Peace in Matagorda County. I ran in that county, and then I also in Austin County. The reason that I'm here is because I have had a few friends in Austin County that received these letters. As a Mexican-American, a member of the Sealy community and a former political candidate, I'm in touch with several of the U.S. citizens who have received threatening letters due to Secretary Whitley's voter purge. These are naturalized U.S. citizens who lawfully registered to vote and who are shocked to receive the letter from Austin County that promised to take away their voting rights if they did not take immediate action. Even though these affected community members of U.S. citizens, they are afraid to come forward because of the climate in Texas and in Austin County. Hispanic members of the community are often subject to legal targeting by law enforcement practices and are threatened like we are illegals just because of the color of our skin. I do not think that David Whitley even considered the impact of the action on my community. Because of this, and because he is so inconsiderate, and because of the threatening actions, I do not believe that he is qualified for this seat. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Members, any questions for this panel?
Thank you all.
All right, seeing none, thank you all so much for coming to your state capitol. Next up, we have Montserrat Garibay, Julietta Garibay, Cecilia Dennis, and a duplicate. So next is Lon Burnham. Sorry, I apologize. We'll start with Montserrat Garibay. If I said that right, I apologize if I missed that.
Yes, my name is Montserrat Garibay. I'm a National Board Certified Teacher, and I am the Secretary-Treasurer of the Texas AFL-CIO. The Texas AFL-CIO is a state labor federation consisting of 235,000 affiliated union members. I sign up to speak today in opposition of the nomination of David Whitley as the Texas Secretary-Treasurer. Secretary of State, I'm sorry. Thank you to the committee for taking the time to hear our testimonies. Again, my name is Montserrat Garibay. I am a naturalized citizen for our beloved country. It took me 20 years to apply to become a citizen. Becoming a citizen impacted my life and reinforced my respect and commitment to our democratic values. Naturalized immigrants like myself and my family take the naturalization process very seriously. For the past 5 years, I have decided and devoted my time and efforts to assist eligible permanent residents to apply for the naturalization process through the Texas AFL-CIO citizenship drives. We have assisted over 15,000 permanent residents who were eligible to apply for their citizenship. I have also attended multiple citizenship oath ceremonies for bus drivers, electricians, fast food workers, custodians, teachers, clerks, union members, and even the parents of my students. You see, people that become U.S. citizens take their oaths seriously and are eager to cast their votes. They are excited to be fully embraced by our nation, the land of the free and the home of the brave. We know that voting as permanent residents is a felony. The person that holds the job the Secretary of State serves as the Chief Election Officer for Texas, assisting election officials at the county level and ensuring that the election laws are interpreted fairly and are applied informally through Texas. The fact that Mr. Whitley has been so carelessly by his statements, he has undermined the office and our trust as Texans. I respectfully ask you to oppose his nomination as the Secretary of State. By not investigating furthering and rushing to judgment in his matter, it is clear that Mr. Whitley has damaged our faith in the electoral process. He is not fit for the job for overseeing the state elections.
Next is Lon Burnham. Sorry. Did you pull the other one? There were two. Same last name. I'm sorry. Julietta Garibay. Sorry, my bad.
It's okay. My name is Julieta Garibay. I'm a U.S. citizen and a Texas registered voter. And I am one of those close to 100,000 people who were wrongly accused of committing voter fraud by the Texas Secretary Whitley, Attorney General Paxton, and Governor Abbott in an attempt to suppress our vote. I renewed my Texas license, in September 2017 with my legal permanent residency card. I took my naturalization oath on April 2018, and I proudly voted on May 2018. As I read the news and claimed, I felt frustrated, outraged, and in shock. When I became a U.S. citizen, I had hoped that maybe now I would live in tranquility and in peace. When the news broke, and I was informed that in fact I was on the list, and Paxton saying that this was criminally prosecuted voter fraud, I questioned myself if I had done something wrong. I questioned, and I got scared. I had to stop myself from letting Whitney or Paxton or Abbott question myself or my right to vote. As a longtime community organizer for almost 15 years, I know that many others receiving an official call or letter questioning if you've committed voter fraud will be very overwhelming. I would likely drive many not only to question themselves if they did something wrong, but prevent them from actually going out to vote. Why would they deal and be disrespected this way? The utter disrespect of saying this is a process there should have been done due diligence of understanding what is the list, where does it come from, who is in it, why, and most importantly, is this a legitimate tool to assess if people are eligible to vote? Something that Mr. Whitley failed to do. Checks and balances should have been done before sending false alarms, sending bogus lists to county registers, sending letters to voters. This is nothing but voter intimidation to people of color and people who are naturalized citizens and foreign born. The checks and balances of what you as elected officials are working for Texans should be done now as you think of confirming this man. Can you truly trust such an important job to someone that hastily and irresponsibly said that we, U.S. citizens, committed voter fraud? A mi gente, salgamos a votar.
Thank you for your testimony. Mr. Burnham?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Some of you will recall that I served here in the House of Representatives for 18 years, served 2 sessions on the Elections Committee, and so all the ills of the process that have been mentioned today are familiar to me, discussed in committee hearings in the previous decade. Many of them not addressed because of the appropriators' lack of concern for these issues. But today, I'm here on behalf of Public Citizen, and I'm going to read some comments representing David Jones of Clean Elections Texas. Both organizations oppose this nomination for all the reasons that have already been cited today. I'm personally reminded of a number of cliches that apply to what's been going on for the last 2 weeks. Garbage in, garbage out, never compare apples to oranges, Caesar's wife should be above approach, and yelling fire in a crowded theater should always be considered a crime. Mr. Jones was not able to be here today. He's an attorney in Dallas, but he does want to make it clear that he feels, and his organization, Clean Elections, feels this amounts to either an intentional discriminatory act of voter suppression or a reckless disregard of the duties of the office. It is apparent that although this misleading and inaccurate disclosure was released with much fanfare and pre-arranged coordinated publicity, thirdly, the incidence of non-citizen voting is practically non-existent, and that's what I want to bear down on. It is practically non-existent, as is the case with most voter fraud. There's been some good critique before this committee today about the fundamental problems of our election process, but it is not voter fraud, and it is not non-citizens voting. This is another example, another unfortunate example of people hastily raising concern such that in my own community in Fort Worth there will be a 3-hour public meeting discussing this red herring on Saturday afternoon, orchestrated by an organization that I've worked with, known to be a right-wing organization. I agree with them on some issues, but not on the voter suppression that we're seeing from this secretary nominee. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Members, any questions for this panel? Seeing none, thank you. Oh, sorry. Yes, Senator Alvarado?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Garibay, can you share with us, I know you alluded to it a bit ago, you went through, became a citizen, and can you just tell us what that felt like to be on a list that is accusing you, potentially, of voter fraud?
Yeah, thank you, Senator Alvarado. As my sister shared, we take voting very seriously. It's something very important. It's a powerful tool to make our voice heard. And when I was notified by the Texas Travis County Registrar's office that I was on the list, I felt very mad because I was basically trampling over my rights as a U.S. citizen. I felt sad because I know this happened because I'm a Latina, because I'm foreign born. Even though I'm now a U.S. citizen, and it's unacceptable.
Can you tell me what the notice said, what you were required to do?
So I actually emailed the Travis County Registrar's office because I wanted to know if I was on the list. I received a call on Wednesday when they told me, yes, you're on the list. And I think I understand that the voter registrar's office are trying to figure out what to do with this debacle. And trying to do the investigations that they need to do. But the frustrating part was that during that call, the person kept on saying, we're investigating everything, but there was no clarity on what is the process. There was no clarity on what was happening I kept on asking, are you notifying me now that I need to send something? She kept on saying, we're going to investigate. And then when I asked, I want all this in writing, she said, I'll do that. But there was no clarity on, like, yes, this is your notification. Yes, you have 30 days. You'll be taking off the roll or not. And so I think it is a shame of what happened. And it's a shame that the state did not take due diligence to know exactly what was going to happen if someone was on the list, how, when, and where. And it's also, it sucks for the registrar's office that they're trying to figure out what to do, what's right, what's wrong, what questions do they ask. And it just shows that there was no due diligence.
And that's the concern that some of us have raised in the earlier questions that we asked, is that when you just negligently release something without double checking the work of, thousands of names, and when it may be perceived as accusing people of doing something, and you're notified that you're on a list, and you immediately want to correct it, and the burden is put on you to prove your citizenship. I remember a point in time when people were on a list. I appreciate you being here. I know it probably took a lot for you to come here and to tell us what you felt getting this notice and having to prove that you were in the right to have a voter registration and to be on the voter registration rolls. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. Additional question? Senator Hall?
Mr. Burnham, in your rapid close there, you made a rather strong statement that there's no voter fraud in Texas. Do you really believe that, or was that a misstatement?
That was a misstatement. It's virtually non-existent, and the issue that keeps being exploited is one that's really intended to do voter suppression. The real problem is in the appropriators and the implementation of the law.
It was a yes or no question.
Oh, well, I took advantage of it.
He did this for a while. He knows how to do that.
Members, additional questions for this panel? All right, seeing none, thank you all for coming to your state capitol to testify. Next panel up, Gail Johnson, Matt Long, Jacob Arnowitz. Some of y'all should be doctors. I say that with love. Alejandra Oliveira. That one may not be. And I know we have additional people coming into the room. If you do wish to testify on for or against Mr. Whitley's confirmation, the forms are on the back table, and you can give them to the young gentleman up here at the front. We'll start with Gail Johnson. Nope, nope. Okay, we'll work in this way then. Mr. Long?
Yes.
When you're settled, I'll let you begin.
Okay, thank you. My name is Matt Long, and I'm here speaking on behalf of myself and in favor of the nomination of David Whitley to the Secretary of State. Our Governor Abbott has taken a really strong public statement on voter fraud and election fraud, and even has quite a few good bills, election integrity bills that have his signature on them. I trust the governor, and I trust his nomination, and after hearing Secretary Whitley today in his testimony earlier, I'm even more convinced that his nomination is appropriate. His concern for the accuracy of voter rolls is very, very important. And in Fredericksburg, we do our citizens' duty by watching polls. And I train people and work with candidates who ask me to help them train poll watchers. And so we get poll watchers up to the polls, and we do our part. And we're very happy to have the backing of the Secretary of State. And we've actually called them during elections several times, and they've answered questions for us. And we need to know that that is true. One of the things I tell our poll watchers, and something I've been hearing here today, and this is important, is that it is almost impossible to leave a Texas polling station and at not having cast at least a provisional ballot. It is almost impossible. All these talks of lists and this list and that list and this number and that number and letters being sent out, it is almost impossible to go into a Texas polling station and not vote. And so all of these concerns, at the end of the day, we're all concerned about the integrity of the vote and does our vote count? And yes, and sometimes we have to jump through hoops, and usually the cause behind that is the government, because the government just doesn't do many things very well, including this. Talk to anybody who's on Social Security or any of our vets, and they'll tell you, you fill out a form with the wrong letter, and you're going to get this notice and that notice and another notice. At the end of the day, my vote is so important to me that if I got a letter that said you got to walk through a den of lions to get to the polling station, I would do so.
Thank you, Mr. Long. Jacob Arnowitz?
Hello, my name is Jacob Aronowitz. I am the field director for Mike Siegel for Congress. You heard from him earlier. I'd like to thank the Assembled Nominations Committee, and I must urge that you oppose and vote against the nomination of Mr. David Whitley for the Secretary of State. There was some discussion, I believe it was a senator sitting on the far side there who brought up, well, why didn't Whitley just vet the list with the counties before moving to action and referring it to the Attorney General and sending this advisory that demanded action of the counties? It's really unclear to me, because if you read the advisory, it says that naturalization is an acceptable proof that someone is actually eligible. So it seems that Whitley and his office and the AG that they consulted knew full and well that naturalization would be something that would make somebody eligible. And there's only two reasonable conclusions: that they did not want to conduct that cross-check because they wanted to produce a more headline-grabbing and larger number of potentially ineligible persons, or that Mr. Whitley and his office are wildly incompetent. Mr. Whitley testified that he didn't know what a Code 64 was. He didn't understand the DPS process for retaining that data. He testified repeatedly that he wasn't a data person. I think he said that someone who's not a data person maybe shouldn't put out press releases that suggest people will be prosecuted for illegal actions. Maybe if he's not a data person, he should consult some data people at the county, because it was obvious from his own advisory that he knew, or someone that he talked to knew, that there were going to be naturalized people on that list, and they released it anyway, and they referred it to the AG. Or maybe they didn't do that cross-check and they didn't know because they don't really understand state government well enough to serve this state as the Secretary of State. Those are the only two reasonable conclusions to be drawn from the way that the advisory is structured and the way that the press release was rolled out. Those are both disqualifying scenarios, and he should be rejected.
Thank you. Ms. Olvera?
Alejandra, yes. Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair Buckingham, members of the committee. Good morning and good afternoon. I don't know. It's the afternoon already. Yeah. My name is Alejandra Olvera, and I'm a member of Workings Defense. I am here to testify to ask you to oppose confirmation of Grady Whitley for the office of Secretary of State. My family, my happiness, my everything. My son Carlos Chavez is 19 years old. I am so proud of him. Last year, he was very excited because he registered to vote, an event with legendary Dolores Huerta. Imagine that. He volunteered in campaigns, and he was ready to exercise his right to vote. He felt like he made a difference. He was proud. Until we received a letter in the mail from the country to let him know he was under investigation. My 19-year-old son, we saw the news, but never thought he would be in the list. After reading the letter, he said to me he was scared. I wasn't going to vote again. He told me he's not going to do it again. And I told him, no, hijo, nos quieren asustar. They want to scare us. This is the reason why I'm here, because I'm devastated that Carlos will say that to me. I am angry, and our community continues to be targeted. This a tactic to intimidate us community, and this is unacceptable. Thank you, and I ask you on behalf of my son Carlos Chavez and many other people you hear from today to oppose the confirmation of Gregory D. Whitley for the office of Secretary of State.
Thank you for your testimony. And we had called Gail Johnson. Did she? Oh, yes, ma'am. Come on up. It's hard with people moving in and out sometimes. So.
Thank you, Senators. And everybody who's involved in this important process. I really appreciate your service to our state and to our voters. I am Gail Johnson. I'm from Lytle, Texas, a small town south of San Antonio. My husband and I both volunteer to sit on elections. I used to be the judge. Now I'm demoted to the clerk, or maybe that's a promotion, and he sits as a judge in whatever polling location they need us in our county. I had to leave earlier and I came back, but Senator Watson was questioning, and the question was drilling down on just what these folks are talking about now. And I wanted to just address the immediacy of the conversation that you had. Sitting on an election, we depend on our Secretary of State. We depend through our county elections administrator. There are that many, 254 counties here in Texas. I don't know how qualified and how well staffed all of these areas are throughout our state, all of the counties. I do know that it requires a lot of training and a lot of knowledge to run an election and to sit on an election. And I personally am for this denomination and for providing him as our new Secretary of State. I think he's intelligent. From what I heard this morning, I think he's dedicated to the citizens of this state. I know sitting on an election, we provide every means possible for people who come in our doors to vote. We provide limited ballots. We provide regular ballots. We provide whatever help they need. We provide nonpartisan help to whomever comes in to vote. I know that they have the privilege to vote if they really want to.
Thank you for your testimony. I think Senator Miles, you're first.
Yeah, Madam Chair, there's some young people in the audience. Can they identify themselves? There's like a group that know who they are. Yeah.
Sure.
Who y'all with?
Texas A&M University System, Chancellor Student Advisory Board.
Welcome to the Capitol.
Right. Yeah. We're glad to have y'all.
You're at a very important time right now.
Senator Miles, any other questions for the panel? Senator Hall?
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Long.
Yes.
You made a statement near the end of your closing that really rang a bell with the reality, and so did you, ma'am. And I've been an election judge. I've worked the polls. I've been there. I have never, ever seen anyone that came in to vote that was turned away. That people can show up with an expired driver's license from another state, and with all the rules we have of a reasonable impediment, you can have no identification and still vote there. So have you ever seen anybody actually turned away from a poll?
Absolutely not, and we've been poll watching and training people to poll watch, and I even have I keep and collect all their notes, and I hear weird stories, and yet every single time they cast a vote, and then you have that amount of time to straighten everything out, and it's impossible to not vote in Texas.
And I agree that we need to be accurate in what we do in the process and so on. But we also have to make sure we don't lose sight of the end product, the end objective. And no one should be disenfranchised from voting. And I don't think I've seen it, but everyone has to understand that your vote that is cast legally can be disenfranchised by one other vote from someone who should not be voting. But we really don't have any filter that stops anyone from who shows up at the poll and wants to vote. At least I haven't seen them. It sounds like you've seen the same thing in a different part of the state.
No, sir, I've never seen an example of it. In fact, I tell my poll watchers that the biggest thing they need to be concerned about is if someone is turned away, that should be the biggest red flag, that if someone actually comes in and they walk out without casting a ballot, you need to go to the judge right then and find out why that person didn't cast a ballot. And so I tell my people that's the biggest red flag to watch for.
Thank you, Mr. Long.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, guys.
Senator Watson?
I feel the need to at least make a statement, particularly now that Senator Hall has declared that nobody ever didn't get to vote. We live in a state that has a pretty strong history of people being denied the opportunity to vote. And while your experience and the senator's experience may be that no one has ever been turned away, that certainly hadn't been universal in the history of our state, and is not your experience is probably not universal even today. In fact, we hear every election cycle of situations where it's not universal. That being said, I also happen to firmly believe, and I hope you will agree with me, that a citizen of the state of Texas that is lawfully registered to vote shouldn't have to go through additional hoops. They ought to not have to cast a provisional ballot if they have been lawfully registered to vote and are citizens of this state. They shouldn't have to do additional things to prove their citizenship simply because of some effort made by the Secretary of State's office that creates additional burdens. And then I would finally say that I appreciate very much the two of y'all coming to testify, and I appreciate very much the service of Senator Hall. But as I sit here, as you sit there, next to this young woman who tells you about how people can be fearful, citizens lawfully registered to vote can be fearful of actually then going, whether they're going to be turned away or not, but going to vote because the government issues a statement that you're under investigation. Even if that is somehow cured, that fear and that intimidation will keep them from voting. And that is also part of the stained history of our state when it comes to people of color being allowed to vote. So I feel it's very important that we not lose sight of all aspects of this simply because of some limited experience that nobody they know has ever been turned away. I appreciate greatly, though, your being here and testifying. And like I say, I appreciate Senator Hall's service. Thank you all.
No public demonstrations, please. Other questions for this panel, senators? Okay, thank you all for your testimony and for coming to your state capitol. Next up is Kent Johnson, Samantha Robles, Alice Yee, Adam Kahn. Do we have Kent Johnson? Samantha, right here. Yes, ma'am, when you're ready.
Hi, I'm Samantha Robles. I'm the Advocacy Director for Progress Texas. I'm here in opposition to the nomination that we're hearing today for Secretary of State. I'm not going to go through what we've already discussed at length this morning, but I think what we can say in the very short time that Whitley has been holding this office, he has shown that he is unfit to hold the highest position of election protection in our state. We know that the list that he has issued was incorrect. We also know that he isn't sure if he checked the data before the release, and he did not go back and send out a statement that would retract or show the right information. If we take a look Let's take a look back. Texas has a long-standing history of creating barriers to voting in this state. Texas has eliminated some of the most important pieces of the Voting Rights Act. We have also eliminated ways that people can vote, show up to vote, eliminated voter ID that impacts people from rural communities to big cities, and our college students. It incredibly impacts people who may not have the means to go get a new ID. Now, when we take a look at what's happened in the last month, our biggest concern is the voters. What is going to happen to the voters who received a letter? What's going to happen to the voters that are on that list who do not receive a letter, right? What can they do if they're not able to get back to the state in 30 days? That is our biggest concern, and I think this committee can start in addressing this issue and addressing the failures of the Secretary of State by voting no on his nomination. You can start by voting no. Earlier this year, I think we heard lawmakers say, like, let's really get down to business. Let's stop these controversies and get down to business, and this is where it starts. Saying no on a nominee who has created a mess of our state, voters on and off this list are watching. They are watching, and while the Secretary of State's office may not be an elected position, y'all's are. Let's get to work. Let's say no to this nominee, and let's find a nominee that will address this mess and vote, and that will protect our voters. Thank you.
Alice Yee, going once, going twice. Okay. Mr. Khan?
Hi. Adam Khan, testifying in favor of Secretary Whitley's nomination, although to begin with, I actually want to start in a point of agreement with Senator Watson, because I definitely agree with you that for the 100 years that the Democrats controlled this state, access to the polls on behalf of minority communities was a big issue. Beyond that, I think Secretary Whitley has demonstrated a willingness to take on tough issues and not back down in the face of fairly significant opposition. So I think that is a fairly big plus in his cap. Now, obviously, in some of the recent controversies, there have been disputes over some of the numbers and the extent of the problem. Now, obviously, I would never accuse my Democratic friends of laying the foundation for future litigation. However, even if the numbers are lower than we suspect, I think only a fool would say that the voter rolls in this state are truly where they should be. Now, Senator Buckingham, Senator Watson, Senator Campbell, you all represent Travis County. I'm a Travis County resident. Elections in Travis County are routinely decided by fewer than 5,000 votes. I don't think that anyone, even in the most hostile to the Secretary of State's numbers, is denying that there could be 5,000 problematic votes. Derek Ryan, the election data specialist, put out a list, I think it was about a week ago, detailing races all around the state that were decided by 5,000, 4,000, fewer than that votes. And so the idea that elections can't be affected by small numbers is just not borne out by reality.
Thank you, Mr. Khan. Members, questions for this panel? Okay, seeing none, thank you all so much. Okay, we have Craig Cosgray and Domingo Garcias. And then is that okay? If there's anyone else in the room, just to give y'all a little notice, who wants to testify on for or against David Whitley's confirmation, the forms are in the back. So these are our last two public testimony listed. We'll start with Mr. Cosgray.
Hi, Senator Buckingham. Thanks for letting me speak today. Thank you, Senators. Appreciate it. My name is Craig Cosgray. I live in Burnett County. I'm retired. I used to be a pilot in the Air Force and with Delta, and I own a movie company called Marengo Films. We manufacture classic movies on DVD. Feel free to hit our website. Let me just say this. One of the things I did for Burnett County, and I still do, I've been a poll watcher for the last 3 out of 4 years. I promise you, everyone in Burnett County is an honest county, and everybody there gets to vote. My daughter's a Latino. She's Mexican American, and so it did bother me hearing some of the testimony today. I promise you that in the U.S. Air Force and at Delta Airlines, where I used to work, and in Burnett County, there's no nonsense going on there. And so please take some of the things you hear with a grain of salt. I have to ask a question. Are driver's licenses issued in the state of Texas to non-citizens? Is there a notification on those driver's license that those people are non-citizens?
No, but if you are here on a temporary visa of some sort, it's shown as a temporary license. If you are here as a permanent resident, then it's the same license that a citizen gets.
Okay, really what I'm getting at today is not really some sort of conspiracy going on by the Republicans or anybody else. I'm actually a Tea Party person. I'm here to support the nominee for the Secretary of State because it appears to me that what he's inherited is basically a chaotic system. I don't know who set that system up, but it seems to me notification should be on the driver's license, and that would eliminate a heck of a lot of procedural errors that are going on. And I want to say to my new fellow Americans in the room, welcome to the United States of America and their bureaucracy. Because if you think you have problems now, wait till the IRS hits you and everybody else down the road. I promise you that most of us are thrilled you're here. I want to remind everyone that there was an election fraud issue that was identified by Dr. Laura Presley in a voter fraud, and she won her case. Hill and Hayes County have both lost 1,000 votes in the 2016 election. So I'm running out of time here. I just want to say this. I think one of the things we can do is take a good hard look at the Director of Elections operation, and maybe we can clarify some of this bureaucratic nonsense and everybody get to vote. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
How do you say your last name?
Garcia?
Okay, it is good. Again, you should be a
Domingo
doctor.
Garcia.
Yes,
Garcia.
sir.
She's making
Please
fun of
go.
your handwriting.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, I write back.
I thought it was maybe a cue. Please, sorry.
Okay. My name is Domingo Garcia. I'm the national president of LULAC. LULAC was founded in 1929. It's the oldest Latino civil rights organization in the United States and the largest. And we were founded to fight Jim Crow laws. And LULAC was the lead plaintiff to stop the poll tax. People had to pay to vote. LULAC was the lead plaintiff against the whites-only primary when Democrats controlled and only whites could vote in the primaries. LULAC was the lead when we started fighting against the gerrymandering. It was LULAC versus the state of Texas, or actually Perry, to stop the gerrymandering of districts in order to disenfranchise Latino voters. And last Tuesday, LULAC was unfortunately again the lead LULAC plaintiff to challenge the state of Texas over the purging of 98,000 U.S. citizens, in our opinion. Julieta Garibay, who just spoke earlier, used to work for me. She's a U.S. citizen. Okay, we had a reporter from the Dallas Morning News who was a citizen. The methodology was flawed, and I'm opposed to Secretary of State because I heard his testimony. Somebody who makes a mistake, especially for the position of Secretary of State that protects the voting rights, should own up and say, you know what, we made a mistake. We're going to withdraw that order, that directive to the elections officials, and we're going to do it right. He chose not to. He told Royce West he didn't know what voter suppression was. When somebody is not willing to own up to the responsibilities and duties as Secretary of State for the great state of Texas, then there is an issue, and I think that U.S. senators have to be the custodians of the fate of Texas voters, and he has failed that test. He failed that test when he sent out a press release at 4:45 p.m. on a Friday and dumped it. He failed that test when he knew the problems on Monday, after the lawsuit on Tuesday, and he still hasn't withdrawn it. That's fundamentally wrong, and you disenfranchise thousands of people, of citizens, who have, most of them are naturalized. Think about that. They know questions you cannot answer here on this panel, regarding the flag and the Constitution, and they really proud to become voters. We at LULAC register them at naturalization ceremonies, and therefore I think we have an obligation to protect those rights. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, questions?
Not a question. I just I wanted to just congratulate Domingo Garcia, who recently was elected. as many of you know, Domingo served in the Texas House of Representatives, so I also wanted to thank you for your service. And although you're not here in the Capitol, you are still very visible in the community, and look forward to many great things in your new leadership, your national role now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Any questions, members?
Thank you.
Okay. Is there anyone else who would like to offer testimony on, for, and against any of the nominations that were posted on the agenda today? If not, public testimony is closed. Oh, sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Senator Campbell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And members, thank you for holding the confirmation hearing. It's clear that improvements can be gained in the process, and I'm confident that Secretary Whitley is determined to make those improvements. I believe he is able to perform his duties and ask that he be confirmed. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members.
Thank you, Senator. Members, we will not be taking a vote on these nominees today. Their nominations will be left pending before the committee for at least a week. At our next hearing on February 14th, I'll be asking for a vote. Any questions or comments?
Yes, I want to say thank you to all of the people that came out to testify, and I want to say thank you to the chair on the conduct of your first meeting as chair of this committee, and did you hear he's asking for a clap for that? But the openness and the allowing a full hearing is very important on these nominees, and at your first hearing to have this important of a nominee and this many people. Thank you very much for the way you conducted the hearing.
Thank you all.
Madam Chair, I would agree as well. I know that sometimes we're dealing with very difficult issues, but the manner in which you conducted yourself as chair and making everyone, despite what their position was, to feel welcome and very accommodating to our guest, I